Chapter 134. A 6,000-word chapter. This chapter is yesterday's. There are 2 chapters left today. My time is back. Walking out of the training ground, on the way to the assembly, Li Tianlan finally knew the top-secret operation that had been operating in secret for a month. The power of the whole country, the plan to overturn the country. In a month, the Snowdance Corps was established and included all the elite institutions in Zhongzhou State. East, West, and down in North America. They were just the first batch of elites of the Snowdance Corps. No one knew how many people there would be later. But if the goal of the whole country could not be achieved, Zhongzhou State would certainly not give up. How many elites would be involved in the end of this operation? How many thunder-shocking realm experts? How many invincible realm experts? Zhongzhou State, East Island, North America, and Western Europe. The turbulent general trend formed by the 4 battlefields was about to sweep the entire dark world. For the first time, Li Tianlan felt that kind of surging and heavy power. Someone was building momentum in the dark, and someone was brewing in the dark. When the general trend was about to rise and the wind and clouds were surging, both the ice-condensing realm elites and the invincible realm experts were part of the rumbling general trend. They had no choice but to move forward. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. His battlefield was in East Island, which could be said to be the most critical place in the whole operation. Gu Qianquan attacked the forces of Fantasy World in Western Europe. Situ Sangyue attacked the forces of Knights Templars in North America. Instead of attacking their headquarters, they attacked their important branches. Such a move might eventually arouse the cooperation of Fantasy World and Knights Templars. But at least in the beginning, the 2 superpowers would acquiesce to Gu Qianquan and Situ Sangyue's behavior of helping them eliminate dissidents. When the 2 superpowers joined forces, it might be the end of the operation. But East Island was different. Gu Qianquan targeted the dark forces of North America in Western Europe, and Situ Sangyue attacked the forces of Western Europe in North America. There was a lot of room for maneuver. In the trip to East Island, they were under high pressure from East Island from the very beginning. They were the enemies of the entire East Island. Do we have a chance of winning? Li Tianlan thought for a long time, and then asked calmly. 70%. Horsewoman no longer called Li Tianlan young master, but before she walked, she instinctively stayed half a step behind him, and her tone was calm and respectful. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "How many people do we have in East Island? 1,000? 2,000? In the end, even if the number increased to 10,000 or 100,000, they might still be no match for East Island, right? How far do we have to go to win? That's not how it works." Horsewoman's tone was soft as she said with a smile, "This is not a large-scale, open war. The war in the dark world is about infiltration and concealment. Our trip this time means that we're the enemy of the entire East Island, but it doesn't count." She paused and seemed to think about it carefully. Then she continued, "Take our samsara, for example. If the samsara goes east and points directly at Kunlun City, even if Zhongzhou State gives Kunlun City support, it will be in secret. The dark world knows that Zhongzhou State has Kunlun City and Sai City, but Zhongzhou State doesn't admit it. They only admit that the god of war of Zhongzhou State is Gu Xingyun. On the surface, Kunlun City has little to do with Zhongzhou State. This is the concealment of the special warfare system." So, Li Tianlan lit a cigarette and raised his tone slightly. "So since they can't admit it, then when the samsara points directly at Kunlun City, Zhongzhou State can't speak for Kunlun City openly. They can send masters to target samsara, but all the rules are the rules of the dark world. Once they cross the line, it will be a real war. Thousands of us are no match for East Island, but with the current national strength of Zhongzhou State, it won't even take a month to destroy East Island. East Island doesn't dare to gamble." Li Tianlan nodded. It was not difficult for him to understand what Horsewoman meant. There were basically no rules in the dark world, but once the rules were established, breaking them would have to bear countless serious consequences. Kunlun City belonged to Zhongzhou State, but it was not in the official voice of Zhongzhou State. Of course, Zhongzhou State would not do this for no reason. The dark world could be said to be a general term for all kinds of shady people and forces. In recent years, Kunlun City had done countless things for Zhongzhou State, which made many countries gnash their teeth in anger. But on the surface, Zhongzhou State and Kunlun City had nothing to do with each other. They found trouble with Kunlun City, but they couldn't find Zhongzhou State. This was a conflict in the dark world. But once Zhongzhou State used its official and visible power to help Kunlun City, the relationship between the two would be confirmed. At that time, perhaps many people would come to Zhongzhou State with old scores to ask for an explanation. The so-called real war might start because of this. The special warfare system of East Island was the same. Night Spirit was a force that they had raised outside many years ago. Now the Snowdance Corps wanted to take the foundation of Night Spirit in East Island. Even if East Island didn't agree, it couldn't do anything on the surface, because this was a matter between the Snowdance Corps and Night Spirit. East Island would secretly send experts to compete with the Snowdance Corps, but on the surface, it could only pretend that it didn't know anything. Once East Island got involved with Night Spirit, the Snowdance Corps would also get involved with Zhongzhou State. East Island couldn't afford the consequences. So on this trip to East Island, their opponents were not East Island, but countless experts of the special warfare system of East Island. This might sound no different, but in fact, the difference was like heaven and earth. Samsara Palace, Kunlun City, Sai City, Snowdance Corps, Knights Templars, Fantasy World. This is just the beginning. As the situation changes, I don't know how many forces will get involved in the future. Horsewoman, do you think I should graduate from the Sky Academy when I come back? Li Tianlan sighed softly and said self-mockingly, I haven't had classes for a few days. No, Horsewoman said with a smile, we're just going to open up the situation this time. When the time is right, someone will show up. Her words were vague, but Li Tianlan didn't ask more. As one of the 12 supermasters of Samsara Palace, Horsewoman might know a lot, or she might know very little. Li Tianlan didn't know anything at the moment, but there were some questions that he didn't need to ask too clearly. This was a competition between the superpowers in the dark world. But for him, it was also a competition between the young generation of Zhongzhou State. What he wanted to do was not to participate in those tricks in the general trend of the competition. Under the general trend, he should be willing to stay dormant and go against the current. That was what he should do. I'm willing to be a chess piece. I don't want to jump out of the chessboard. I just want to move forward. On the way to the gathering place, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and muttered to himself. Horsewoman smiled slightly and said nothing. When the two of them arrived at the gathering place, the 50 elites of the Sky Academy who participated in the special training had stood in a neat line. In front of the line was a high platform. Under the high platform was a shelf with dozens of wine bowls on it. But the high platform was empty under the light. For the time being, no high-level personnel had appeared. That's my place. Horsewoman pointed to the high platform and said in stiff Chinese, I'm going. Li Tianlan nodded slightly. Tianlan, here. At the back of the line, Li Baiqian's tall and thin figure appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. He waved his hand vigorously with a bright smile and a smug look on his face. Li Tianlan turned his eyes and saw Li Baiqian. He also saw Ning Qiansheng, Yi Huayu, Yu Qingyan, and Su Chu, who stood at the back of these people but attracted more attention than anyone else. He hadn't seen them for more than a month. Everyone seemed to have not changed, but their auras were much stronger. Li Tianlan felt a little warm in his heart and quickly walked over. Originally, he wanted to bypass the crowd, but seeing him coming over, the two students in the front of the line hesitated and took the initiative to make way for him. Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. The next second, the line was completely separated and everyone made way for him. Li Tianlan passed through the crowd with a stunned look and looked at Li Baiqian. What's going on? He might have some fame among the freshmen now, but it was not enough to make everyone afraid of him. Was it? They were all scared after being beaten by eldest senior brother. Li Baiqian smiled and walked over to put his arm around Su Chu's shoulder affectionately. Su Chu was broad and Li Baiqian was thin and weak. When the two stood together, it was really funny. Young master, Su Chu saw Li Tianlan's eyes sweep over and called him with a dull look. I have discussed with Beitian. Eldest senior brother will join East Emperor Palace. But now we are not arrogant, so eldest senior brother will follow you to protect your safety. This is also his intention. Ning Qianqing glanced at Li Tianlan and explained. Li Tianlan nodded slightly. Although he was still a little confused about Su Chu, at least it was not a bad thing for this fierce general to join East Emperor Palace. He took the initiative to stretch out his hand and said with a smile, "Welcome. Since we are all on the same side, don't call me young master from now on. Just call me by my name." Su Chu shook his head and did not shake hands. Instead, he bowed again and said in a low voice, "Young master is young master." Facing this stubborn man, Li Tianlan could not say anything more for a while. He just nodded casually and stood among them without saying anything. "Hey, Tianlan, you don't know that eldest senior brother is really fierce in the past month. Basically, no one can resist his punch, whether it is a freshman or a senior. Even Fan How You Dare not take his punch head-on. An expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm is fierce and powerful. He can be said to be the top expert in our East Emperor Palace now." Li Beitian stood beside Li Tianlan and smiled. It seemed that he was a fox assuming the majesty of tiger. "What about you? What have you gained in the past month?" Li Tianlan stared at the high platform in front of him and asked with a chuckle. "We're okay, but Qingyan is the most miserable one. In the past month or so, Director Qin tortured Qingyan so much that Qiancheng felt sorry for her. Haha, Qiancheng said that we should celebrate when we arrive at East Island." Li Beitian laughed strangely. "Celebrate?" Li Tianlan was confused. When he looked at Yu Qingyan again, he found that this girl with a simple and weak temperament was different from a month ago. She was still herself, but her clear eyes were still clear, and the innocence had been replaced by firmness. Li Tianlan followed her hand and looked over. In his sight, he saw Ning Qiansheng and Yu Qingyan holding each other's hands tightly, their fingers interlocked. Li Tianlan looked enlightened and said with a smile, "We should indeed congratulate them. We should get drunk." He looked at Ning Qiansheng's somewhat unnatural expression and joked, "You move fast, boy. It has only been a month." Yu Qingyan's face turned red. She lowered her head and said nothing, but she did not loosen her grip on Ning Qiansheng's hand. Ning Qiansheng coughed and changed the topic with a serious face. "Tianlan, how had you been the past month? Had you broken through?" "I've condensed ice. I've gained a lot." Li Tianlan nodded with a smile. Before Ning Qiansheng could congratulate him, Li Beitian, who was beside him, began to show off without hesitation. "Tianlan, your realm is a little low. I thought you could enter the fire-flaming realm. It seems that a genius like me is really hard to come by. Come on, I'll show you this." As he spoke, he directly reached out his hand. A flame sprang out from his palm. The flame surged and finally condensed into an unusually solid and delicate fire sword in his palm. The scorching and empty sword intent radiated, hollow and sharp, gathering fire into soldiers. This was already a sign of the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm. Li Tianlan's eyes lit up slightly. Li Beitian continued, "So, I should be the second expert in the East Emperor Palace now." The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He reached out and casually covered Li Baiqian's palm. The fire sword in Li Baiqian's palm was still there, but all the sword intent froze in an instant. The water on Li Tianlan's palm spread down, and the fire in Li Baiqian's palm had completely disappeared. "Just be honest and rank third." Li Tianlan chuckled and looked at Li Beitian, who was dumbfounded. He chuckled and said, "The leader is here. Cut the crap." In his sight, a row of figures walked up the high platform one by one. Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed slightly. At the very front, a man with an ordinary appearance but extremely spirited eyes was walking at the very front. Beside him, there was a young figure that could topple nations and cities, walking side by side with him, peerless in style. At this moment, she seemed to have become the only person on the high platform. She was cold, yet dazzling. For a moment, everyone was dazzled by her. They even subconsciously ignored the other figures on the high platform. Even the appearance of the foreign woman, Night, did not cause much discussion and commotion. Only Li Tianlan's eyes remained calm. He took a deep look at the middle-aged man at the forefront and kept his composure. Yi Dongsheng. Except for the time at the border, this was the second time he saw the god of army of Zhongzhou State. Zhuang Huayang, Qin Ku, Gu Yunxia, Tribulation, and Thunder God appeared one by one. Li Tianlan even saw Wang Xiaoyao at the end. His eyes slowly turned and finally rested on Qin Weibai, who was walking side by side with Yi Dongsheng. His eyes were gentle. The whole line was silent. Sister-in-law is really too beautiful. Tianlan, you're such a tragedy. Li Beitian looked at Qin Weibai, shook his head, and sighed. He looked distressed. What kind of woman can interest you in the future? You're starting from a high point. Li Tianlan didn't bother to pay attention to him. He just focused on her on the high platform, who looked like a fairy descending to the world. He had never been so calm. Qin Weibai also looked at him and smiled softly. The moment they looked at each other, it seemed that they were each other's whole world. On and off the platform, the leaders and the students saluted each other. Yi Dongsheng, who was at the forefront, glanced around and finally stopped on Li Tianlan. His serious eyes seemed to soften. Zhongzhou State and Samsara conspired against East Island. Samsara asked for too little, so little that all the leaders had some doubts. Some radical leaders even thought it was a conspiracy of Samsara. But Li Tianlan was also on the list of East Island, which made some people suppress their inner doubts. The master of Samsara Palace went straight to Mount Dibbing for Li Tianlan and even sacrificed herself with the Wang family of Beihai. Her protection of Li Tianlan was evident. With Li Tianlan, the leaders of Zhongzhou State finally decided to start this action even though they had doubts. But in the following time, Li Tianlan was bound to be the focus of their attention. He glanced at Li Tianlan and coughed softly. Everyone's eyes turned from Qin Weibai and fell on Yi Dongsheng. Qin Weibai seemed to realize something amidst countless jealous and fiery gazes. She quietly took a step back, blocking everyone's view of her. Yi Dongsheng's warm and soft voice continued to ring on the platform and floated into everyone's ears. Everyone, this action concerns the overall situation of Zhongzhou State and even the fate of Zhongzhou State. At the airport 3 kilometers behind me, the plane is ready. In 40 minutes, all of you will set off for East Island with your mission. I don't know what you will see and hear next, but I can tell you for sure that this trip is a test for each of you. You will bleed, sacrifice, and be buried in a foreign land. You may encounter all kinds of desperate and dangerous situations. In East Island, you represent Zhongzhou State. Similarly, in East Island, you are the enemies of the whole East Island. He paused and continued. Comrades of the Border Control Corps and the Eastern Theater of Operations secretly set off a week ago. You will be the last of the first batch. Before you set off, I want to ask you one more thing. Is there anyone who wants to quit this action? Silence. Total silence. Yi Dongsheng waited quietly for more than a minute and then continued. It seems that no one is going to give up this action. You all know what your choice means, so I don't need to say more. Let me tell you one last thing. When you go to East Island, you will be the most elite warriors of Zhongzhou State. East Island is the front line, the battlefield. There are no deserters on the battlefield. You can quit this action now, quit the Sky Academy, quit the Special Warfare System. But when you go to the battlefield, quitting is tantamount to treason. Do you understand? Yes. The 50 students under the platform said in unison. It was not a loud voice, but it was extremely firm and unshakable. Yi Dongsheng took a deep breath and suddenly waved his hand. All the wine bowls on the shelf under the platform flew up and accurately floated in front of every student and every high-level official on the platform. Yi Dongsheng picked up the wine bowl and smiled. Drink and sing. I will wait for your triumphant return in Zhongzhou State. Then I will sing a song to celebrate your success. He held the wine bowl and drank up the wine in it. Everyone followed his action and drank up the wine in front of them. This time, I hope that you will go forward with indomitable will and die a worthy death. Yi Dongsheng put down the wine bowl, faced the audience, raised his hand with a solemn face, and made a military salute. The arms on and off the platform all rose up. The atmosphere was solemn and solemn. "Let's go." Yi Dongsheng put down his arm and said straightforwardly. There were no heroic words to boost morale. This oath before departure was more like a farewell. Send them to die. Go forward with indomitable will and die a worthy death. This was the cruel and bloody dark world. Elites should die. Warriors should die. The line under the platform walked to the airport in silence. The high-level officials on the platform also stepped down one by one. Tribulation, Thunder God, Qin Ku, Gu Yunxia, Horsewoman. These are the thunder-shocking realm experts going to East Island. And Qin Weibai stepped down with these experts. The high-level officials who stayed on the platform all looked at Qin Weibai in surprise, but they didn't say anything. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Qin Weibai walked down the steps softly. The line passed in silence. When Qin Weibai walked down the last step, Li Tianlan and other people from East Emperor Palace were about to pass by the platform. Li Tianlan stopped and looked at the peerless beauty in front of him who didn't seem to belong to the mortal world. He chuckled and said, "When did you come back?" "Not long ago," Qin Weibai said softly, and her eyes were deep and sentimental. "You've grown a lot taller." Li Tianlan nodded and said vaguely, "The medicine is very good, but you're still not as handsome as before." Qin Weibai said again. Li Tianlan didn't understand, but he didn't think much about it. Qin Weibai took a step forward, tidied his collar, and said softly, "Be careful. Horsewoman and Flaming Fire will protect you at any time. If you can't do it, you might as well give up the two. Anyway, you have to live." Horsewoman stood beside Qin Weibai, and her expression didn't change at all. Li Tianlan nodded slightly, reached out his hand, and held Qin Weibai's cool little hand. He said, "It's okay. I received your medicine. Don't worry." Qin Weibai chuckled and suddenly took another step forward. She put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck, and her rosy and delicate little mouth directly pressed on Li Tianlan's. She was delicate, strong, and domineering. What did the opinion of the world have to do with her? Li Tianlan had always been the only person in her world. It was like that in the past, and it would be like that in the future. Everyone was dumbfounded. Li Beitian whistled and shouted with excitement. Ning Qiansheng and the others applauded hard, looking very happy. Li Tianlan subconsciously put his arms around Qin Weibai's slender waist and kissed her seriously and carefully. On the high platform, only Wang Xiaoyao looked bitter. It wasn't embarrassment or anger, but a kind of loneliness and loss that came from his bones. Below the stage, the woman who was being hugged and kissed by someone else was someone he really liked and even loved. There was suddenly a trace of tenderness in the iron-blooded atmosphere between heaven and earth. After a long time, the kiss, as if there was no one else around, finally ended. Qin Weibai put her arms around Li Tianlan's neck tightly and quietly gasped. "I'll wait for you to come back. There will be a reward then." Li Tianlan patted Qin Weibai's back and said, The procession of students finally passed the high platform. Qin Weibai stood where she was and watched Li Tianlan's disappearing figure. She stood there motionlessly for a long time. "Go!" Under the high platform, Qin Weibai suddenly said. Horsewoman, who had been standing beside Qin Weibai, responded and was about to leave. "Remember," Qin Weibai's cold voice sounded. "You could die, but nothing can happen to my man." Chapter 135. At 5 o'clock in the morning, under the dim light, a medium-sized flight from the capital of East Island slowly landed at Huading Lanqiao Airport. The door opened, and a group of 3 people walked down the gangway in silence. Instead of taking the airport bus, they walked to the airport hall 1 kilometer away. The airport was a little dim, and it was cold and deserted. Only the signal lights of various colors were flashing. The 3 of them had no luggage on them. They walked unhurriedly in the airport, and their behavior looked very strange. There's a saying in Zhongzhou State called the dragnet. "Teacher, is this the dragnet in front of us?" 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman, surrounded by a man in a kimono, slowly moved forward. The young man on the left looked at the empty and deserted airport in front of him and said in a sarcastic tone. The young man was about 30 years old. He was a little short, but he was extremely handsome. He could even be said to have an evil charm. His carefully trimmed hair was neatly combed, and he was wearing a beige casual outfit. At first glance, he looked like a young man who walked out a comic book. He was a little sharp, but he exuded an indifference that did not care about anything. The dragnet. Before the man in the middle said anything, the young woman on the right said, softly with a smile, "Phone, do you think we're walking into a trap now? Yes or no?" Before the young man called Fong said anything, the man in the middle said first. This was a man in his 40s, with sharp sword intent flying all over his body. He was tall and thin. He was not handsome, but his facial features combined gave people a sense of extreme vicissitudes and indifference, full of charm. He wore a moon-white kimono, with wooden shoes on his feet and a long saber hanging on his waist. He walked steadily and resolutely on the road of the airport, like an ancient East Island samurai. With distant sword intent, he stepped on wooden shoes and walked step by step to the prosperous Huading. He was silent, serious, and paranoid. His voice was a little hoarse, with a very strange softness, soft and warm. Zhongzhou State is really not a place we should come to, or we shouldn't come here openly. But in the current situation of Zhongzhou State, they can't even take care of themselves. As long as we don't take action, they won't have the guts to deal with us. He stretched out his hand and pointed at the empty airport, saying calmly, "This is Zhongzhou State. There seems to be nothing here, but now our every move is under the watch of others. So, Feng, Xueji, watch your mouths. The trip to Zhongzhou State is just to watch the show. After the result comes out, we can plan other things." The young man named Feng responded lazily. However, the woman called Xuejie bowed slightly and agreed with a respectful expression. Xuejie was probably in her early 30s, but she looked younger. Her skin was as white as snow, her long hair was like clouds, and her curvaceous figure was extremely attractive. The temperature in Huading in June could already be considered hot. She wore a light gray professional skirt, black stockings, and high heels, which vividly displayed her well-proportioned figure that was neither fat nor thin. She looked like a mature, elegant, and opinionated urban white-collar worker, but her every move carried a kind of resignation and charm, overflowing amorous, delicate, and extremely enchanting. Coquettish. This was the first impression she gave people. She was simply the kind of woman who was coquettish to the bone, but her every word and every move revealed an indescribable cleverness and dignity. It was really a great enjoyment to press such a woman under one's body and ravage her. In East Island, where the spirit of martial arts flourished for a long time, it was easy to find a thunder-shocking realm expert and a beautiful woman, but a beautiful thunder-shocking realm expert was extremely rare. Moreover, a thunder-shocking realm expert who was beautiful, charming, and could serve a man comfortably in bed was even rarer. Xuejie was undoubtedly one of the best among them. Feng glanced at Xuejie calmly, quietly hiding the desire and passion deep in his eyes. She was the teacher's favorite concubine. He didn't know if he could make a great contribution and let the teacher reward him with a night of tasting her. He swallowed his saliva and suppressed his inner thoughts. He whispered in the weird East Island language that sounded wretched and obscene. "Teacher, the master of Samsara Palace is going to fight with the god of war of Zhongzhou State. What do you think of this battle?" The man in the kimono glanced at him and pondered for a while. Then he said calmly, "No matter who wins or loses, it will benefit East Island." Feng was stunned. He wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. How could he not know this? The two invincible realm experts of East Island entered Zhongzhou State in order to take action as soon as the result of this battle was out. They seemed to have only 3 people, but over the past month, more than 4 figures of the elites of the special warfare system of East Island had secretly sneaked into Zhongzhou State, and this was just one of them. Now everyone was secretly waiting for the moment when the outcome and life and death were decided. By then, no matter who won or lost, Zhongzhou State would fall into chaos, big or small. But Feng didn't want to think about these entanglements of interests. He just wanted to listen to the teacher's analysis of martial arts about who was stronger between the master of Samsara Palace and the god of war of Zhongzhou State. I've seen Tian Xin, and I also know her strength. The man in the kimono seemed to know what Feng was thinking, and he continued. With her strength, she was killed with one strike, even with blue sky underworld in her hand. The strength of the master of Samsara Palace is definitely not weaker than the top 5 on the divine list. But this person rarely fights, and we have too little information to analyze. In this battle, even if the master of Samsara Palace dies, Gu Xingyun won't have a good time. Not to mention being seriously injured. Whether he can stay in the invincible realm in the future or even touch martial arts again is a problem. So whether we win or lose this trip, we will benefit, whether it's Zhongzhou State or Samsara Palace. From this point of view, I really hope that the god of war of Zhongzhou State is defeated. After all, death and disability are different. The former has no more variables, but the latter. As long as he doesn't die, it's hard to feel at ease. I really hope that the master of Samsara Palace dies. Feng smiled evilly. His pupils became abnormally dark in the twinkling, which also made him look evil and weird. The man in the kimono raised his eyebrows and said indifferently, Gu Xingyun's death is in our best interest. Not only the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, but even our territory. He stopped talking, and his eyes became a little gloomy. Territory. For hundreds of years, this had been a scar in the hearts of East Islanders. East Island was composed of 3 big islands and more than 7,000 small islands, covering an area of 300,000 square kilometers. But East Island was not like this hundreds of years ago. Hundreds of years ago, East Island was composed of 4 big islands, and one of them was North Island. Today, North Island had long disappeared in the memory of people all over the world. Maybe only East Islanders still remembered it. There was no such thing as North Island in the world. North Island, which used to belong to East Island, now belonged to Zhongzhou State. Beihai Province, which belonged to Zhongzhou State. With Fuxing City as the center, Beihai Province was divided into North Beihai and South Beihai. The north and the south were separated by a shallow sea of dozens of kilometers. Today, North Beihai, which was more than 70,000 square kilometers and occupied half of Beihai Province, was North Island, which used to belong to East Island. East Island had lent North Island to the Wang family of Beihai for 300 years in the name of lease. The original term had long passed. For many years, generations of East Islanders had never given up the idea of taking back North Island. But what they got in return was humiliation again and again. This was the history of blood and tears of the whole East Island. Now, the master of Samsara Palace challenged the god of war of Zhongzhou State, which was another opportunity for East Island. Once both sides suffered losses, the superpower of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State would fall into an unprecedented state of emptiness. Even if Wang Tianzong had the title of first on the divine list, he couldn't control the whole dark world. The Wang family of Beihai couldn't lose the foundation of Zhongzhou State, so they had to give up North Beihai reluctantly. This could be said to be the best opportunity for East Island now. 2 invincible realm superiors entered the game in person, and countless superiors secretly lurked in Zhongzhou State. Such a big gamble, what they wanted, and what they wanted at all costs. On June 15th, the god of war of Zhongzhou State was defeated and killed. This was what the whole East Island hoped to see. I know what teacher's goal is, but I have no ambition, and I don't want to think about things that are too noble. I only ask one thing, teacher. Feng licked his lips, and the evil and greed in his eyes were almost undisguised. Say it. The man in the kimono thought of something and said flatly, I've long heard that Qin Wei Bai, the number 2 figure of Samsara Palace, is an outstanding beauty and the first beauty in the dark world. If the master of Samsara Palace dies, I only hope that teacher can let me enjoy Qin Wei Bai for one night. One night is enough. I will definitely serve teacher and Wuji Palace with my life from now on. Feng's eyes were extremely hot. He had never seen Qin Wei Bai, but he had already outlined a clear and cold image in his mind. She was high above, perfect, holy, and unparalleled, like a fairy, like a goddess. One night was really enough. I don't know how the first beauty in the dark world compares with those actresses in East Island. I really want to smack. Before Fong finished his words, the man in the kimono had already stretched out his hand and slapped him hard in the face. Fong covered his face and looked at the teacher in astonishment. Then he quickly lowered his head. At that moment, he could clearly see the coldness and rage in the eyes of the teacher, who gave him everything today. That was the most naked, killing intent. You're a pile of shit. Do you think you can compare with the moon? That's blasphemy. The man in the kimono narrowed his eyes tightly, and there was undisguised anger in his eyes. The sharp sword intent whistled around his body. The sword intent swept over Feng's face and suddenly left a bloody mark on his face. Yes. Feng bowed deeply and said respectfully, "You're obsessed with women all day long. What can you achieve in your life? You've disgraced Wuji Palace." The man in the kimono flicked his wide kimono sleeves and walked straight forward on his wooden shoes. Wuji Palace, Liuhua Hall, Jifeng Sword Training School. These were the three holy lands of martial arts in East Island, and also the forces owned by the three superiors of the Invincible Realm. The Divine Wind Force, formed by the three holy lands, was the power center of the special warfare system of East Island. Its status was no different from that of Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State, and even more important, Night Spirit was outside, and Divine Wind was inside. In the past countless years, this was the situation of the special warfare system of East Island. Now that Night Spirit was destroyed, the status of the Divine Wind Force and the three holy lands became more important. Today, among the three holy lands of martial arts in East Island, Wuji Palace was the well-deserved number one in terms of power and influence. Tianhai Wuji, the palace master of Wuji Palace, was known as the first superior of East Island and ranked 8th on the Divine List. In the current ranking of the Divine List, his position could be said to be right behind the master of Samsara Palace. Tianhai Wuji was originally born in Jifeng Sword Training School, the number one sword school in East Island, but he became the biggest traitor of Jifeng Sword Training School. More than 10 years ago, Tianhai Wuji was just 30 years old and had already entered the Thundershocking realm. Moreover, he was internally selected as the next sect master of Jifeng Sword Training School. But all of a sudden, he made a lot of remarks that disapproved of Jifeng Sword Principle. In the martial arts world of East Island, such remarks were simply shocking. The elders of Jifeng Sword Training School were furious and expelled Tianhai Wuji from Jifeng Sword Training School. Tianhai Wuji left alone. For years later, he broke through the Invincible Realm, established Wuji Palace, and created his own Wuji Way. In order to completely abandon his past, Tianhai Wuji changed his sword to saber. In the entire Dark World, he could be said to be the only Grandmaster of Sword Principle who used sabers. Wuji Palace was established. Coincidentally, Jifeng Sword Training School in East Island suffered from internal strife a few years ago and never recovered. In order to protect themselves in the chaos, countless people of Jifeng Sword Training School announced that they gave up Jifeng Sword Principle and acknowledged the Wuji Way, so they joined Wuji Palace. Wuji Palace, which had been established for a short time, soared up and now became the most famous holy land of martial arts in East Island. Wind was Tianhai Wuji's proudest student, and Snow Girl was Tianhai Wuji's favorite pet in bed, or even a slave. In addition, Wuji Palace also had left and right visiting professors and 4 protectors. In a small place like East Island, such a force could be said to be extremely powerful. This was also one of the reasons why Tianhai Wuji dared to come to Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State was about to be in chaos, and the power of Wuji Palace was enough to ensure his safety in Zhongzhou State. They were gradually approaching the airport lobby. Tianhai Wuji walked with wooden shoes, his face expressionless. Wind, who had been slapped, wiped the blood on his face and followed Tianhai Wuji. Addicted to women? He narrowed his eyes mocking. What a ridiculous excuse. This excuse was so clumsy, but the meaning was extremely obvious. Tianhai Wuji was telling him clearly that even if the master of Samsara Palace died, his idea of having Qin Wei Bai for one night was also illusory. Wind gently gritted his teeth and said nothing. Tianhai Wuji slightly narrowed his eyes, as if he knew everything behind him like the palm of his hand. He could not agree to Wind's request. His student had never seen Qin Wei Bai, but as the palace master of Wuji Palace, he had seen her once. He dreamed of it, tossing and turning. They walked into the airport lobby and walked to the arrival gate. Tianhai Wuji and the other two finally saw the people who would pick them up. Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy, who had just sent the 50 freshmen away, was waiting at the arrival gate. Standing beside him were Qin Ku, the deputy director of the teaching office of the Sky Academy, and Chao Huazhong, the head of the tactical staff department. There were 3 people on both sides, and they gradually approached each other. Zhuang Huayang did not sleep all night, but there was no fatigue in his eyes. Looking at the East Island Grandmaster in a kimono with a long saber on his waist, he took the initiative to reach out his hand and said with a smile, "Hello, Tianhai Palace Master. I'm Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy." "Hello." Tianhai Wuji shook hands with Zhuang Huayang and said with a smile, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." "Headmaster Zhuang, I have a Zhongzhou name. My name is Yi Wuji." He bowed deeply to Zhuang Huayang, and his etiquette was meticulous. He said softly, "Please give me your advice." "Yi Wuji?" Zhuang Huayang was stunned, and then said with a hypocritical smile, "Hello, Palace Master Yi. I hope we can learn from each other and communicate with each other." Yi Wuji straightened up, nodded casually, looked at Wind beside him, and said, "He is Wind. Well, Le Fong, how about this name?" Wind said nothing, glanced at the cold and elegant Qin Ku obscurely, and then bowed deeply to Zhuang Huayang. Yi Wuji introduced Snow Girl again. After the introduction of both sides, he said with a smile, "Headmaster Zhuang, can we go now?" Zhuang Huayang hesitated a little, and then said softly with a smile, "Palace Master Yi, I'm afraid we have to wait." "Well, another distinguished guest from East Island is coming soon. How about we go together?" "Another distinguished guest?" Yi Wuji's eyes narrowed slightly. At this time, he knew who the other distinguished guest from East Island that Zhuang Huayang mentioned was without thinking. Jifeng Sword Sage, Lusheng Sanquan, the leader of Jifeng Sword Training School. Both of them were great grandmasters of East Island, but when Yi Wuji set off from East Island, Lusheng Sanquan was in Northern Europe. He didn't expect that they would arrive together. He nodded calmly and said in a gentle tone, "Of course, the guest should follow the host's wishes. Thank you for your understanding, Palace Master." Zhuang Huayang stood beside Yi Wuji with a smile on his face, waiting quietly. In his line of sight, a black shadow lightly floated over. Like a cold wind, it looked slow, but inside it was fast and fierce. Zhuang Huayang subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Although he had seen the photos countless times, it was the first time for Zhuang Huayang to see the Sword Sage of East Island with his own eyes. Lusheng Sanquan looked less than 40 years old. He had long hair, which was tied up high, and wore a loose black robe. He was handsome and aloof, with a long sword hanging on his waist and a green jade flute of good quality in his hand. He walked slowly. In an instant, it seemed that there was only loneliness and desolation left in the world. There was a gust of wind moving forward. The stronger the wind, the stronger the sword intent. The lonely and desolated sword intent spread with the wind, and the whole airport hall seemed to be turned into a field. Lusheng Sanquan's pace was neither fast nor slow, but every step seemed to step on people's hearts. The color of the jade flute was soft. Lusheng Sanquan's long hair, which was tied up high, swayed gently. Behind the endless, lonely sword intent, there was a demeanor that made everyone sad and confused. It was his own story. The long road was long, and only the sword was his companion. Zhuang Huayang sighed softly and subconsciously looked at Yi Wuji beside him. More than 10 years ago, from the moment this kendo grandmaster who used sabers became the biggest trader of Jifeng sword reigning school of East Island, the once supreme kendo school in East Island seemed to have begun to decline. In the year when Yiwuji was about to break through the invincible realm, the special warfare system of East Island was in chaos. Lusheng Sanchuan's master, the old sword sage of East Island, Song Xiaotai, was seriously injured and dying. After Yiwuji, the first senior brother, left Jifeng sword reigning school, there was only Lusheng Sanchuan and another young man to support the overall situation in the young generation. The young man from East Island had no name, and his code name was Broken Sword. Tianhai Wuji, Broken Sword, and Lusheng Sanchuan. They used to be the three most outstanding disciples of Jifeng Kendo of Jifeng sword reigning school, and they all had invincible talent. But when everyone thought that Jifeng sword reigning school was about to usher in its peak, the three disciples completely parted ways. Tianhai Wuji became a traitor, and Broken Sword became the biggest traitor in East Island in decades. When the special warfare system of East Island was in chaos, at the most critical moment, Broken Sword killed his master with a sword and made the illusion that he was dead and put all the blame on Lusheng Sanchuan. Lusheng Sanchuan, who had just entered the thunder-shocking realm, was almost deserted in the blink of an eye. He escaped from East Island and searched for the truth alone while being chased by countless elite masters of East Island. Jifeng sword reigning school fell apart. In the same year, Tianhai Wuji broke through the fulfillment of the thunder-shocking realm and went straight to the invincible realm. From the thunder-shocking realm to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and then to the fulfillment of the thunder-shocking realm. Then he entered the invincible realm. When Jifeng sword reigning school almost disappeared, Lusheng Sanchuan returned to East Island and reformed Jifeng sword reigning school with the strength of the invincible realm. The death of the old sword sage was intentionally or unintentionally forgotten by all parties in East Island. Lusheng Sanchuan's position became more and more stable. A few years ago, he was invited to the imperial palace by the Mikado of East Island and became the crown prince's kendo teacher. After that, Jifeng's sword reigning school stabilized again. The broken sword disappeared without a trace. But between Tianhai Wuji and Lusheng Sanchuan, they completely inherited the feud between Jifeng sword reigning school and Wuji Palace. The deviation of the understanding of martial arts between the two brothers, Tianhai Wuji, stood by and did nothing when the old sword sage died, and he even took advantage of the situation. All became the knot in their hearts that could not be untied. Liuhua Palace in East Island was the most traditional and ancient ninja force, and it had always been neutral. And now the new Jifeng sword reigning school became the most important chess piece for East Island to check and balance Wuji Palace. The entanglement between the three holy lands even spread to the Divine Wind Force, the special warfare center of East Island. And there was a remaining night spirit. East Island was not peaceful at the moment. And this time, about 2,000 elites of Zhongzhou State entered East Island one after another. It seemed that they could seize a lot of opportunities in the entanglement of the superpowers. Zhuang Huayang smiled softly. For the plot of Zhongzhou State, the Six and Samsara Palace had fully cooperated. Even if East Island had a plan, the two invincible realm experts had already arrived in Zhongzhou State. It would not be easy for them to go back in a short time. Although the outcome of this battle was still far away, Zhongzhou State had already taken the lead. Next, they could take their time to plot. Zhuang Huayang smiled and took a step forward. Looking at Lusheng Sanchuan coming over, he chuckled and said, "Your Excellency, Sword Sage, welcome to Zhongzhou State to attend the ceremony. I'm Zhuang Huayang, the headmaster of the Sky Academy." "Headmaster Zhuang, hello." Lusheng Sanchuan's voice was gentle and elegant. With his appearance, his lethality was simply unparalleled. Zhuang Huayang smiled and introduced calmly, "Your Excellency, Sword Sage, let me introduce to you His Excellency Tianhai Wuji, the Palace Master of Wuji Palace. Both of you are martial arts grandmasters of East Island, so you should know each other well, right?" Zhuang Huayang's words were really heart-wrenching. Yi Wuji glanced at him, expressionless, and said nothing. Lusheng Sanchuan gently squeezed the jade flute in his hand, and his smile became more and more elegant. Wuji? I've never heard of it. You, Lu Feng, who stood beside Yi Wuji, narrowed his eyes and subconsciously took a step forward. Yi Wuji calmly stopped him, but he looked at Zhuang Huayang and said indifferently, "Can we go now?" "Of course." Zhuang Huayang answered with a smile and took the lead to lead the way. The moment Yi Wuji turned around, he glanced at Lusheng Sanchuan intentionally or unintentionally. Their eyes were cold, and both of them had killing intent to each other, but there was also a very obscure tacit understanding. "Headmaster Zhuang, I heard that there's an outstanding freshman in your school named Li Tianlan. I wonder if I have the honor to meet him?" Yi Wuji walked beside Zhuang Huayang and suddenly asked with a chuckle. Zhuang Huayang's heart skipped a beat, and he calmly said with a smile, "Li Tianlan? He's a very good freshman, but he hasn't grown up yet. How do you know him, Palace Master?" "I heard it by accident." Yi Wuji chuckled. Zhuang Huayang nodded. He didn't say that he could meet him, but he didn't say that he couldn't. The conversation just now was over. The muscles at the corner of Yi Wuji's mouth twitched, and he narrowed his eyes. Li Tianlan. This name appeared with Qin Wei Bai and the master of Samsara Palace. How could he not know? If the master of Samsara Palace was defeated this time, he would kill Li Tianlan first. This lowly thing, like an ant, had desecrated the most holy and flawless moon in his heart. No matter what, he had to die. Yi Wuji took a deep breath, and the killing intent surged in his heart, but his eyes were strangely gentle. Chapter 136. At 8 o'clock in the morning on June 11th, it was raining heavily in Dongdu. The plane landed smoothly on the runway in the heavy rain. Li Tianlan walked out of the cabin and walked along the passage leading to the airport lobby. Looking at the dense raindrops outside the window hitting the ground crazily, his originally calm heart seemed to become a little depressed. The storm was coming? No, the heavy rain had fallen, as if it was going to overturn the world. The sky outside the window was gloomy. The sky, which was supposed to be full of bright sunshine, was covered with dark clouds and a strange black color. The sun did not rise. In the morning, Dongdu looked like a long night was coming. "This day is really awesome." Li Beitian took Yi Huayu's small hand and put down the phone with the other hand. He said with a headache, "I just checked the weather forecast of Dongdu. There will be heavy rain for the next week. In this damn weather, it's not unusual to encounter tsunamis and earthquakes. I don't want to die in the hands of heavenly calamity without killing a single person. There's nothing more unjust than that." Li Beitian's voice was very low and vague, but some sensitive words still stimulated the nerves of some people. In front of the 6 people from East Emperor Palace, a slim and slender figure of a woman almost instinctively turned around, and her eyes fell on Li Beitian. The woman was extremely beautiful. She had ear-length short hair, which was rare in East Island. She was full of heroic spirit and looked extremely simple and capable. She looked at Li Beitian and narrowed her eyes slightly. She said in a slightly dignified tone, "Who did you just say?" Li Beitian looked confused. His identity was not inferior to that of the woman in front of him, but his strength was low. In the previous month of special training, he was one of the people she paid special attention to. After being abused for a month, even if he had a strong psychological quality, Li Beitian had some psychological shadow. He did not dare to refute anything at the moment. He just said weakly, "I didn't say who." "Heavenly calamity?" The woman's eyes condensed. When she was serious, her whole person exuded a kind of demonic and dangerous temperament. Her eyes were not sharp, but there was a kind of pervasive femininity in them. She looked gloomy, and she was definitely not a good person. Catastrophe literally meant natural disaster, but in the dark world, it was also a famous code name. He ranked 5th on the killer list in the dark world, and was known as the contemporary king of gun. This man was only in the fire-flaming realm, but he was extremely good at hiding and disguising. He was also the leading expert in changing guns in the Dark World. He held 2 famous guns. Although they were not murderous weapons, they were very powerful. Under the invincible realm, as long as he kept a distance and aimed at them, any expert in the thunder-shocking realm would be fatally threatened. Now the situation in East Island was treacherous and could break out at any moment. When she suddenly heard the name Heavenly Calamity, she couldn't help but feel nervous. Teacher Bai, he was talking about the weather. Li Tianlan pointed to the heavy rain outside and said with a chuckle, he has already associated the heavy rain with tsunamis and earthquakes. Bai Tian said that he is not afraid of man-made disasters, but natural disasters. Teacher Bai replied with an "oh," and then her beautiful but extremely dangerous eyes glared at him. What Teacher Bai? Call me sister or teacher in the future. It sounds awful. Do I look old? She took a step closer to Li Tianlan and said in a low voice, if it weren't for you, little bastard, my aunt wouldn't have sent me to the Sky Academy. I hate it most when people call me teacher. You even sprinkle salt on my wound. Do you want to die? Do you want to die? Li Tianlan touched his nose with a bitter smile and called her Sister Bai. The first miss of the Bai family, who was now the group leader of the actual combat lesson of the Sky Academy, was really familiar with him. Since she came to the Sky Academy, Li Tianlan only saw her once when she boarded the plane a few hours ago, and they talked less than 10 words. He really didn't know how this first miss of the Bai family, who looked extremely cold, could be so close to him naturally, but this big sister kept calling him little bastard. Li Tianlan didn't feel disgusted at all. Bai Yuming nodded with satisfaction. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, Li Tianlan asked calmly, Sister Bai, have you encountered heavenly calamity? Today, he was no longer the greenhorn at that time. At least he had a general understanding of the dark world. Naturally, he had heard of the famous heavenly calamity. Bai Yoming's delicate face turned slightly cold, and she nodded and said, that's a freak. 2 years ago, when I led a team to perform a mission in Africa, I met him once. If it weren't for several subordinates who covered me with their lives, I guess I would have died in Africa. Heavenly calamity itself is not too terrible, but with his 2 guns, as long as he keeps a distance, there are basically few people under the invincible realm who can't be killed by him. Modern hot weapons are not a fair thing to martial arts. Li Tianlan nodded, thinking of the sky attack that could probably be returned to him by Dark through a special channel. He seemed to be lost in thought. Bai Yuming turned around again and walked forward. They entered Dongdu in the name of a tourist group, using fake identities that were more authentic than their real identities, and the plane was not a private plane. Among the hundreds of passengers, except for the 50 people who came from the Sky Academy and several thunder-shocking realm experts who led the team, the rest were all ordinary tourists. Now it was raining heavily today. Tourists, men and women, were walking in the passage densely. They were really inconspicuous in the crowd. Dongdu was the capital city of East Island and also the headquarters of the Divine Wind Force, the special warfare center of East Island. Zhongzhou State invested the least personnel in this city, but it was also the most elite force. Tribulation by Yuming, Gu Yunxia, Enchantress, Horsewoman, and Flaming Fire were responsible for the action in Dongdu. Thunder God, Qin Ku, and others were scattered on the other 2 big islands of East Island. The 2,000 elites who sneaked into East Island have been in various places of East Island for a month. With the arrival of the elites from the Sky Academy, there were only 50 people from the Deep Sea Academy left. Before the arrival of the second batch of reinforcements from Zhongzhou State, the elites from the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy, 100 people, were all the combat forces of Zhongzhou State in East Island. Outside the window, the heavy rain fell wildly. Li Tianlan looked out the window. In the majestic rain, heaven and earth seemed to be red, like blood, mournful and glaring. He turned around indifferently and walked directly into the airport lobby. Although he could not fly, he would fly to the sky. Although there was no sound, the sound would be amazing. East Island was his first battlefield, a big enough stage, a magnificent general trend. On this day, in the downpour of Dongdu, Li Tianlan officially stepped on the stage of the dark world as a chess piece. Like a soldier crossing the river, he could only move forward. As a special warfare academy with the same specifications as the Sky Academy, the Deep Sea Academy was located in the depths of the West Mountain of Yuzhou. Although there was no surging scene of rivers and seas, the Deep Sea Academy, surrounded by mountains, also had the magnificence that the Sky Academy did not have. The Deep Sea Academy was roughly the same size as the Sky Academy. Although the dean, General Qin Songlin, was not one of the top 10 contemporary experts of Zhongzhou State, he was 10 years younger than Zhuang Huaiyang. Although he was not famous, the actual combat capability of the two should be about the same. The higher-ups had always attached great importance to the two special warfare academies. From making the list of the higher-ups to choosing the school site, making the curriculum, and even recruiting the students, there were special people in charge of everything. They tried to balance the strength of the two special warfare academies so that the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State could develop vigorously. The two special warfare academies met once every 3 years. Behind a lot of bloodshed and sacrifice, the talents who came out of them could be called the foundation of a country. With such strength, the importance of balancing each other was self-evident. As for the special and subtle situation of Huiting in recent years, it was not the focus of the higher-ups when choosing the distribution of students. Otherwise, many big shots would not let their children and apprentices avoid the list selected by the higher-ups and enter the Sky Academy through the back door. At 8 o'clock in the morning, when it rained heavily in Dongdu, it was also drizzling in Yuzhou City. Surrounded by West Mountain, the Deep Sea Academy was filled with mist. It was ethereal, like a fairyland. Unlike Yi Dongsheng in the Sky Academy, before the best 50 elites of the Deep Sea Academy went to battle, Gu Xingyun, the god of war of Zhongzhou State, went on the stage in person and held a speech that was exciting enough to make people's blood boil. After the meeting, he personally sent the 50 elites to the plain. After everything was done, he returned to the temporary resting place arranged for him by the Deep Sea Academy. The resting place was located on the second floor of the residential area. The interior decoration was not luxurious, but it was extremely comfortable. Gu Xingyun, dressed in a military uniform with the red rank of marshal, walked in through the door, put the coat in his hand on the hanger, and walked into the living room calmly. In the living room, a beautiful woman of unknown age sat silently. She wore a light green cheongsam and sat quietly on the sofa. Like an orchid in an empty valley, she had a kind of tranquil and deep indifference. Her long black and beautiful hair, like a waterfall, was draped over her shoulders. She held a cup of tea in her snow-white hand with a green bracelet and said nothing. Gu Xingyin walked to her and sat down, pouring himself a cup of tea. The woman didn't move, as if she was unaware of everything around her. This was a woman who could be said to be devastatingly beautiful from afar. However, when one looked at her up close, although she was still extremely beautiful, her entire person lacked a trace of moving vitality. She was like a vivid and exquisite doll. Beautiful, of course, extremely beautiful, but not a living thing. I heard that you paid attention to several freshmen in the Deep Sea Academy. Today, I deliberately came to have a look. Sure enough, they're all promising talents. Gu Xingyin took a sip of water from the teacup and said with a smile, "Among the 5 people, 3 are likely to be used by Kunlun City. As for the other 2, one could be said to be on our side. Although his mind is uncertain, I can still grasp him on the whole. As for the other one, you don't have to think about him. You should know from his surname that he is from the Dongshan clan, and we can't win him over." The woman was still silent. There was a kind of numbness, as if she was not interested in anything in the world. In this plot of Zhongzhou State, the East Island part was almost entirely based on the Sky Academy. Not to mention the 50 most elite students, there were several high-level leaders of the Sky Academy among the team leaders. Such a scale might not be regarded as the Sky Academy coming out in full force, but at least it was a big investment, both emotionally and logically. As the supreme leader of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, Gu Xingyun should go to the Sky Academy and personally send the people of the Sky Academy to battle. But the truth made everyone feel astonished. The one who went to the Sky Academy was another leader of the Special Warfare Group, Qi Beizong, the standing minister of the army headquarters. But Gu Xingyun himself came to the Deep Sea Academy. Everyone was guessing the profound meaning of Gu Xingyun's move. Some even suspected that Gu Xingyun dared not see the people of Samsara who were in the Sky Academy at this time. But this rumor was strangled as soon as it came out. Such a rumor was really stupid. On June 15th, the Invincible Realm would fight with the Invincible Realm, and it was not a real life-and-death fight. As the war god of Zhongzhou State, how could Gu Xingyun be afraid of a fight? But in this way, everyone was even less clear about the meaning of Gu Xingyun's coming to the Deep Sea Academy. Just to pay attention to the freshmen that the woman in front of her paid attention to? Not to mention whether others believed it or not. Even the woman herself did not believe it. She did not believe it and did not want to think about it. Kunlun City. It had nothing to do with her. Gu Xingyun. It also had nothing to do with her. Life and death, the general trend, the world of mortals, snow, everything seemed to have nothing to do with her. Gu Xingyun waited for a while. Seeing that the woman did not mean to speak at all, he laughed at himself and said softly, "Li Shi, when this thing is over, I will accompany you to have a look in Zhongzhou State. Haven't you always wanted to go to the Waterfall of Beauties in Beihai Province? How about I go with you?" Waterfall of Beauties. A trace of trance finally appeared in the woman's eyes, which had always been numb, but it flashed away. She shook her head and said in a dead tone, "I've been there. I don't have to see it. It's also good to revisit the old place," Gu Xingyun said with a smile. His tone was elegant and gentle, looking unusually warm. The woman was silent again and did not say a word. Li Shi, a name that sounded extremely sad, a name that even countless people in Zhongzhou State had never heard of. However, this name also represented an extremely illustrious identity. Mrs. Governor of Kunlun City. Mrs. Governor of Kunlun City, whose relationship with Gu Xingyun had been frozen for countless years. Gu Xingyun picked up the teacup to drink water and became silent. The mobile phone vibrated slightly in his pocket. Gu Xingyun put down the teacup and took out his mobile phone to open it. On the screen, a slightly dim but tender photo appeared on the screen. It was a photo of a young man and a woman kissing. The woman's black hair was flying, and she was extremely beautiful. The man was dressed in camouflage clothes. He looked ordinary, but he kissed attentively and affectionately. Qin Weibai. Li Tianlan. Gu Xingyun held the mobile phone steadily and stared at the photo on the screen for a long time. He did not even move his body. Such an unrestrained picture appeared on Qin Weibai, a core high-level member of Samsara. What did this mean? He narrowed his eyes slightly, put the mobile phone in front of Li Shi, and said with a chuckle, "How about this young man? He has wind and thunder veins, and his future achievements are limitless. When he enters the Invincible Realm and grows for a few years, even I can't suppress him." Li Shi's eyes were empty, and she was silent. No one knew if she looked at the photo again. Gu Xingyun took back the mobile phone and was silent for a while. Then he suddenly said, "What do you think of Qingsheng?" Li Shi's dead body suddenly trembled. She slowly turned around and stared at Gu Xingyun. Guhan's Han, the young master of Kunlun City, was not her child. But Gu Qingsheng, the little princess of Kunlun City, was her and Gu Xingyun's daughter. She was only 17 years old this year. "I'm afraid Yulan can't handle him." Gu Xingyun pointed to Li Tianlan in the photo and said with a smile, "What do you think of Qingsheng?" Swish! Li Shi suddenly raised her hand. The teacup in her hand was suddenly raised, and the whole cup of tea was poured on Gu Xingyun's face without reservation. "Ha!" Li Shi threw the teacup in her hand on the tea table with no expression. She slowly got up and said with a scornful look, "Shameless." She turned around and left the living room directly without stopping. The god of war of Zhongzhou State, whose face was splashed with tea, sat motionless on the sofa. After a while, he wiped the tea on his face carefully and seriously. The tea was cold with the tea leaves. It was like a heart that had been sealed for nearly 20 years. P.S. Chapter 137. Azure Pool was located on the bank of Lake Luji in the suburbs of Dongdu. It was a medium-sized hot spring club. The internal garden structure imitated the ancient architecture of Dongdu, which was very unique and full of charm. It was one of the most famous hot spring sightseeing areas in the whole East Island. Around Lake Luji, there were countless hot spring clubs of all sizes. Azure Pool came late, and the boss was a foreigner from Gaoshan State. So, it had been excluded from the beginning. In the past 10 years, the club had been moved 3 times in a row, and each time it moved, it was more and more remote than the last, which invisibly led to the reputation of Azure Pool becoming more and more miserable. Every day, business was bleak, and it even fell to the point where it could barely operate. However, such a remote location was not without its benefits. Although very few serious businessmen were willing to accept such benefits, it was a reality. Azure Pool was located on the bank of a lake, backed by a high mountain, with steep terrain and dense jungle. It was a place that was extremely difficult to be surrounded, and it was very suitable for breaking out. For some people with ulterior motives, it was simply the best place to hide. It was remote and low-key. Even if they were exposed, they had a considerable possibility of escaping unscathed with the terrain. This was the place where Li Tianlan and others stayed. There were more than 50 people, and they were divided into 5 batches. When it was nearly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, all of them safely entered the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club. Li Tianlan's East Emperor Palace was the last batch, led by Bai Yuming herself. There were 7 people from East Emperor Palace now. 6 of them came to East Island, but only Ning Qiansheng knew Japanese, and he was not very proficient in it. When he translated the name of the club with a strange look, the bumpkin Li Tianlan didn't think much of it, but Li Baiqian's face turned red. Azure Pool. How brave a weirdo must be to come up with such a name. He suppressed his desire to complain and walked into the club. The boss, who had arranged other people, walked out with a smile on his face. He held an umbrella in one hand and walked face to face with them in the heavy rain. The boss looked about 50 years old. He was slightly bald and fat. He was wearing sportswear and had a smile on his face. He looked exactly like a standard businessman who made money. But Li Tianlan and others didn't dare to look down on this fat, middle-aged man, because the small amount of information that Tribulation had personally sent them on the plane clearly mentioned the true identity of the owner of the Hot Spring Club. Han Shixuan, a businessman from Gaoshan State, came from Zhongzhou State and had a small family fortune. He immigrated to Gaoshan State 20 years ago. He was easygoing and extremely luxurious. He was a prodigal who had reached a certain level of squandering. In less than 2 years in Gaoshan State, he had squandered his family business. After that, he made a living in Gaoshan State, opened a restaurant, started a company, ran a bar, played esports, and even owned a very small entertainment company. This big prodigal had countless ways to make money, but in the end, miraculously, none of them really made him rich. In a few years, he almost traveled to all the big cities in Gaoshan State and lost money in everything he did. In the end, 10 years ago, because he owed a huge debt in Gaoshan State, he snuck into East Island when he was about to be sued. He opened a hot spring club with what little money he had left, changed his name, and barely settled down with a net profit of a few million a year. But all this was Han Shixuan's superficial identity. In fact, if he hadn't read the information in advance, Li Tianlan would never have believed that this seemingly ordinary greasy uncle turned out to be a real expert of the thunder-shocking realm. He now had the nationality of Gaoshan State, but his actual identity was a senior agent belonging to the 2nd Department of the General Staff Headquarters of Zhongzhou State. He was the Deputy Director of the 9th Bureau of the 2nd Department of the General Staff Headquarters. In terms of military rank, he was a veritable senior colonel. The 2nd Department of the General Staff Headquarters was the famous Military Intelligence Department of Zhongzhou State. Its internal structure was extremely complicated. The functions of the 16 bureaus overlapped with each other, but each had its own duties. The 9th Bureau belonged to the External Action Bureau, which collected intelligence of various countries in Asia. At certain times, it even carried out some assassination missions. Countries such as Gaoshan, East Island, Hung State, and Annan State were all within the scope of activities of the Ninth Bureau. Han Shishun was one of the 6 deputy directors of the Ninth Bureau of the Second Department, and he was the most senior deputy director. Now he was in East Island. All the intelligence of Zhongzhou State in East Island was first collected by him, and then transmitted to Zhongzhou State. To put it bluntly, Han Shishun was the intelligence leader of Zhongzhou State in East Island. Such a position might not be extremely powerful, but it was extremely sensitive, and only those who were very loyal could bear the responsibility. Han Shishun could stay in East Island for 10 years, which showed that Zhongzhou State valued and trusted him. "Hello, Chief." Looking at the boss coming over, Bai Yuming held the umbrella in one hand and directly raised her arm to give a military salute with the other hand. Han Shishun had the military rank of senior colonel, and the most important goal of Zhongzhou State's scheme this time was to plot against East Island. Han Shishun's position was more important than before, and it was certain that he would be conferred the rank of Major General in the near future. Before Bai Yuming came to the Sky Academy, she was a deputy brigade officer of the Border Control Corps. Although the military rank of the officers of the Border Control Corps was generally one level higher than that of the officers of the 4 theaters of operations, the deputy brigade officer was just a colonel, which was one level lower than Han Shishun's current military rank, so it was completely reasonable for her to salute. Li Tianlan and the others also raised their hands instinctively and gave a solemn salute. The chubby Han Shishun was startled, but he didn't return the salute. Instead, he grabbed Bai Yuming's raised arm and said helplessly, "Don't pay attention to this in East Island. There's no benefit. You're the guests, and I'm the boss. It's as simple as that." Bai Yuming simply nodded and didn't say much. Han Shishun rolled his eyes and suddenly said, "Which one of you is Li Tianlan?" Li Tianlan was slightly stunned. He looked at Han Shishun and said casually, "I am." Before Han Shishun's eyes fell on Li Tianlan, Bai Yuming had already taken a step forward calmly and said softly, "Tianlan is my sworn brother." "Chief, how do you know him?" Han Shishun was deeply surprised that Bai Yuming was so nervous, but he didn't think much about it. People like them, who had been sent out by the Military Intelligence Department all year round, basically had no position. The General Staff Headquarters of Zhongzhou State had always been considered the sphere of influence of the Southeast Group. The Chief of General Staff and the Minister of the Second Ministry could also be said to be the capable generals of the Southeast Group. But even so, the Southeast Group didn't dare to say that it controlled the Military Intelligence Department. People like Han Shishun didn't have the concept of the 6 groups in their hearts. Zhongzhou State was their mission, honor, and even soul. "I talked to Headmaster Zhuang before I came here," Han Shishun said with a smile. "The headmaster told me about this young heavenly son who is gradually becoming famous among the young generation of Zhongzhou State. Now there are 2 wind and thunder veins and 1 heavenly king heart in Zhongzhou State, and they are all in East Island. I must protect such people without the headmaster's order. In the future, when Zhongzhou State expands its territory, we will rely on heavenly sons like you." This was a great compliment. Heavenly sons and young heavenly sons were previously used to describe Wang Shengxiao and Gu Han, the young master of Kunlun City. Now Han Shishun added such a title to Li Tianlan, which showed how much this uncle who was devoted to the country looked forward to him. "Chief, you are too serious." Li Tianlan took a step forward and said calmly. Han Shishun took a deep look at Li Tianlan and smiled without saying anything. Yes, Tianlan's realm is still low, and he still needs time to grow. Bai Yuming echoed. Han Shishun's words might not be malicious, but it might not sound like this when it was spread to the outside world. Behind the word kill by overpraise, there were too many bloody tragedies. Bai Yuming did not want Li Tianlan to wear the hat of young heavenly son when his realm was still low. Zhongzhou State is the world's #1 power, and it can afford some time. Han Shishun patted Li Tianlan's shoulder calmly, and his palm was warm and strong. "In East Island, if you need anything, just tell me. As long as I can provide it, I will never hide it." He paused, and then said softly but seriously, "You don't betray Zhongzhou State, and Zhongzhou State will not betray you." "Don't betray each other?" Li Tianlan laughed at himself for no reason. If that's the case, what happened to the Li family and his father in those days? He took a deep breath and said without changing his expression, "I understand." Han Shishuan nodded and said with a smile, "That's enough. Some colleagues who came just now are waiting for you in the conference room. Do you have anything you need to put in your residence? If not, let's go to the conference room." Bai Yuming nodded. They held umbrellas and went straight to the conference room under the leadership of Han Shishuan. The conference room that Han Shishuan mentioned was actually a small banquet hall in the club, located at the highest position of the club. When Li Tianlan and others walked into the banquet hall, Tribulation, who was in charge of this operation, had changed into a black robe again. He took off the human skin mask on his face and put on the silver mask again. He stood quietly in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with his back to everyone. Through the pouring rain outside the window, he was looking at the vague and hazy holy mountain of East Island in the distance. On a mountainside of the active volcano covered with snow, the Divine Wind Force, the Special Warfare Center of East Island, was located. That place could be said to be the most important goal of their trip. There was a screen beside Tribulation, on which appeared the map of East Island. Countless obvious bright spots were flashing on the map, and no one knew what they meant. They went straight into the banquet hall. The moment they crossed the threshold, Bai Yuming, who was walking beside Li Tianlan, paused, intentionally or unintentionally. Li Tianlan, who didn't realize this at all, kept walking into the hall. Bai Yuming and others followed him closely, surrounding him as he moved forward. For a moment, almost everyone's eyes fell on Li Tianlan's face. Confusion, surprise, thoughtfulness, all kinds of eyes with complicated meanings. The enchanting and dangerous Bai Yuming, the mighty and tall Su Chu, Li Beitian with illusory sword intent, Ning Qiansheng, who was silent and indifferent, Yu Qingyan, who was as clear as water, and Yi Huayu, who carried a long sword. Everyone followed behind Li Tianlan. In an instant, Li Tianlan stood alone in front of them, which was almost a little dazzling. Bai Yuming smiled gently. She didn't want Han Shishuan to call Li Tianlan a young heavenly son, but in her heart, her brother was no different from Wang Shengxiao, Guhan's Han, and others. Since he was a young heavenly son, he should have the grandeur of a young heavenly son. Li Tianlan finally realized something, but he kept his composure and kept moving forward. There was a huge and exaggerated table in the banquet hall, which was obviously moved here temporarily. Li Tianlan didn't care about the position, so he went to an empty seat and sat down. Under the focus of everyone's eyes, his expression didn't change at all. His gentle and calm eyes swept back one by one. His momentum wasn't fierce, but he didn't give in or feel uneasy either. Most people retracted their gazes. Only two people were still looking at Li Tianlan. Both of them were extremely young, and their seats were relatively casual. One of them was handsome and had a slender figure. He exuded a warm and modest aura from head to toe. His body was more steady than sharp. Rather than calling him a young genius, it was better to call him a young scholar. The other person was also young, about 23 or 24 years old. He looked ordinary and wore camouflage clothes without military ranks. He looked like the most ordinary freshman of the Sky Academy, but his eyes were sharp. When the light in his eyes moved, it gave people a feeling of sharpness and danger. The three people looked at each other and nodded slightly, but their eyes were full of indifference. Han Shishuan just said that 2 wind and thunder veins and 1 heavenly king heart were all in East Island. To be exact, they should all be in Dongdu, in this conference room. Wang Shengxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai. Guhan's Han, the young master of Kunlun City, a young heavenly son. Chapter 138. When Li Tianlan and the others sat down, the elites of the Sky Academy were officially present. The heavy rain outside the window beat the ground wantonly. The room was dim, and the electronic map of East Island beside Tribulation was more conspicuous. Everyone is here. Yi Fengcheng, who was sitting on the lower left of the main seat, glanced around looked at Tribulation, who was still staring at the snow-white holy mountain in the distance, and reported. At the beginning, when the plan of Zhongzhou State was still being discussed by the higher-ups, when it was determined that the Sky Academy would be the leader of the action in Dongdu, the Southeast Group very much hoped that Yi Fengxiang could take the lead of the trip to Dongdu. Yi Fengxiang was frivolous and unruly, but he was not a fool. On the contrary, he was very good at scheming. When the time came, he would be matched with a steady and prudent deputy, which could be said to be the best combination for the trip to Dongdu. The national plan with the strength of a country was of great importance, and the Southeast Group did not avoid it. After recommending Yi Fengxiang, it also recommended Lieutenant General Wang Zhaoyang, the commander of the Shadow Sting Force, the largest and most mysterious special forces of Zhongzhou State, to be Yi Fengxiang's deputy. This proposal was excellent purely for the sake of official business, and it was even discussed at the meeting of the decision-making committee. However, the candidate recommended by the Sky Academy was Tribulation. Yi Fengxiang might be better able to preside over the overall situation, but in terms of combat capability, Tribulation was far ahead of Yi Fengxiang. As for the actions of the Dark World, everything could be ignored except for strength. So the final result was that Tribulation was in charge of the action in Dongdu and even the whole East Island, and Yi Fengxiang was the deputy. As for the Shadow Sting Force, it was put on the second list to go to East Island. No one knew what Yi Fengxiang thought, but at least on the surface, his attitude towards Tribulation was relatively respectful, and there was no knot in his heart. You preside over it. Tribulation looked at the holy mountain in the distance and suddenly said. Yi Fengxiang raised his eyebrows slightly. Before he spoke, Tribulation's figure had disappeared, leaving only an almost invisible shadow in place. I'll go to the mountain and have a look. His voice echoed in the room, hoarse and erratic. On the mountain, there was no doubt that Tribulation was going to climb the holy mountain of East Island to see the actual situation of the Divine Wind Force. According to reliable sources, Tianhai Wuji and Lu Sheng Sangquan, two of the three grandmasters in East Island, had already entered Zhongzhou State. But the palace master of Liuhua Palace, who was also the only supreme ninja in East Island, stayed in the Holy Mountain all year round to oversee the Divine Wind Force. Was it too risky for Tribulation to explore the Divine Wind Force under the nose of an invincible realm ninja? Tribulation's figure disappeared, and his shadow gradually became faint. Yi Fengxiang was silent for a while before he raised his head and looked at Han Shishuan, who was walking behind Li Tianlan and the others. He said with a smile, "Director Han, please introduce them to us." "All right." Han Shishuan closed the door of the banquet hall, responded calmly, and walked directly to the screen in front of the conference table. He reached out his hand and tapped on the screen. The map on the screen quickly zoomed in. A map of the entire eastern capital appeared on the screen, eventually taking up the entire screen. All that was left were the countless red dots flashing on the screen of the eastern capital map. They were densely packed and varied in brightness. Everyone, Han Shishuan coughed softly, looked at the audience, and said slowly, "Night Spirit is a force that East Island secretly supports. For decades, East Island's support for Night Spirit is far more than that of the Divine Wind Force. It gathered the power of the entire East Island and built it into a superpower in the Dark World. This is no secret, and I think everyone knows about it. And these..." He reached out his hand and pointed at the screen, saying blandly, "These red marks are all the forces of Night Spirit in Eastern Capital. Note that it's only the forces of Night Spirit in Eastern Capital, not the whole East Island." Everyone looked at the screen in front of them in silence. Countless red dots flashed on the screen, and vaguely, they had a tendency to cover all the important areas of the city, which was dazzling. The foundation of Night Spirit in East Island could be seen from these red dots alone. But no one felt pressured. Almost everyone was thinking about what it would be like if these red dots represented the forces of Zhongzhou State in East Island. Just thinking about such a prospect made everyone's blood boil. Han Shishuan reached out his hand again and clicked on the screen. A large number of red dots on the screen suddenly dimmed, leaving about 30 or 40 dots flashing slightly. He looked at the red marks on the map and continued to say, "In the more than a month since the fall of Night Spirit, the government of East Island has reacted as soon as possible. Before the fall of Night Spirit, it was the top superpower in the whole dark world, and its influence spread across all countries. Now, it's hard for East Island to take back too much of Night Spirit's forces outside, but their government is determined to take back the forces inside East Island. In the past month, the Divine Wind Force has been moving very frequently. We have received reliable information that under the instruction of the royal family and the cabinet, the military of East Island, the special warfare system, the underworld, and even the business and political circles are nibbling away the foundation left by Night Spirit. At their current speed, they can barely control the foundation of Night Spirit in East Island in a year at most. In 3 years at most, they can win people's hearts and change the blood inside. After that, all of this will be firmly controlled by the government of East Island." Han Shurshuan's palm seemed to touch a red dot casually. The map grew bigger again. On the increasingly dazzling red, a picture of a middle-aged man popped up on the screen. This was a middle-aged man in his 40s with a goatee and a bald head. He was wearing a kimono, looking gloomy and serious. Tsuruta Yamamoto. Han Shurshuan looked at the picture and introduced him. The director of the intelligence department of Yamaguchi-gumi. About 25 days ago, Tsuruta Yamamoto had confirmed his resignation from Yamaguchi-gumi and became the leader of Rendezvous Audiovisual Group. Han Shurshuan paused and continued. "Let me introduce you. Rendezvous Audiovisual Group is one of the largest civilian intelligence organizations in Rendezvous. It is the eyes and ears of Night Spirit in Rendezvous. Its members are extremely complicated and spread all over the world. Their headquarters is located in Rendezvous, but they have been expanding in the past decade. Within the territory of East Island, their development potential is very amazing. And Tsuruta Yamamoto has always been one of the backbone figures of the Yamamoto family. It is impossible for him to betray the Yamamoto family or Yamaguchi-gumi. Now he has taken over Rendezvous Audiovisual Group. Everyone should know what this means." He clicked again, and another red dot zoomed in. This time, 3 pictures appeared on the screen at the same time. "This place is the headquarters of Shitian Financial Group." Han Shurshuan looked at the screen and narrowed his eyes. At this moment, the old agent who had been lurking in East Island for many years finally shed the shrewdness and cunning of a businessman. He exuded a sharp and precise temperament. Shitian Financial Group was a consortium that rose in East Island about 20 years ago. It didn't have a lot of resources, but it was extremely powerful. It was one of the biggest ATMs of Night Spirit in East Island. After Night Spirit was destroyed, these 2 people in the picture entered Shitian Financial Group almost immediately. The one in the middle is Shitian Ingji, the current patriarch of the Shitian clan. The one on the left is from the logistics department of the Divine Wind Force. The one on the right used to be a senior official of the Ministry of Finance of East Island. Han Shurshuan retracted the red dot, clicked on another one, and continued the introduction. Everyone listened attentively and attentively. This series of introductions was almost the process of all parties in East Island nibbling away or gathering all the foundations of Night Spirit in East Island in the past month. It was orderly and not messy at all. Everything seemed extremely orderly. Han Shurshuan didn't finish the introduction of these red dots. He introduced about 8 or 9 people, and then stopped talking. Yi Fengsheng, who had been listening carefully, saw Han Shurshuan stop. He smiled and said, "The things that Director Han didn't introduce are basically the same as what he introduced before. Everyone, tell me, what do you think?" These are notes. As soon as Yi Fengsheng's voice fell, by Yu Ming, who was sitting next to Li Tianlan, already said solemnly, "These things that Director Han introduced are all the important foundations of Night Spirit in East Island, involving intelligence, finance, armaments, underworld, military, and other fields. As long as you control one of these nodes, you can influence an industry that belongs to Night Spirit. The things that Director Han didn't introduce must be the same. Those marked in red on the screen should be the most important industries of Night Spirit in Dongdu. Controlling these means controlling the foundation of night spirit in Dongdu. East Island is so fast. Not only fast, but also very stable. I think even inside night spirit, there won't be much resistance for the East Island government to take over all this. Gu Yinxia's face was a little gloomy, and she said heavily, "These nodes are in net together. As long as East Island really controls these, our trip will be in vain." I guess it's the same in other places in East Island, right? Horsewoman asked slowly after a moment of silence. It's better in other places. It happened suddenly and in a short time. East Island is slowly planning, and it's impossible to achieve the situation in Dongdu without a few months. Han Shishun smiled, and he didn't refuse to answer the question because of Horsewoman's foreign identity. And even in Dongdu, this net still has a lot of problems. Yi Fengcheng continued. East Island acts very fast, but after all, the time is too short, and the remaining forces of Night Spirit may not really accept the incorporation of the East Island government. Every king has his own courtiers. This is a universal truth. Their behavior is just an expedient measure forced by the form. At present, although this net has been formed, it's not strong, and there's a possibility of destruction. Destruction? The enchantress slightly raised her eyebrows. Yes, it's destruction. Yi Fengcheng nodded and took out a few pieces of folded information from his arms. I have a few lists here. This is our first phase of the battle plan, codenamed Hunting. The content is to hunt all over East Island. The plan of the army headquarters in Kunlun City is to send a few small but extremely elite hunting teams to hunt all over East Island in a month and completely tear up the net woven by East Island. He patted the information in his hand and said in a decisive tone, 180 people, none of them can live. Everyone at the meeting felt a chill in their hearts. In the silence, Yi Fengcheng glanced around and said with a chuckle, these 180 people are the top talents in all aspects of East Island, and they are very professional. But there are not many whose strength is above the thundershocking realm. So for this action, the army headquarters in Kunlun City have decided that all of you will form a hunting team. This is our first battle since we entered East Island. Everyone who would like to volunteer. Silence. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Half a minute. As Yi Fengcheng subconsciously squinted his eyes, a voice suddenly spoke. To be precise, there were 3 voices, but they were combined. It sounded more like the same person was speaking. I'll go. Everyone's heart skipped a beat, and there was a strange feeling rising in their hearts. There were 3 people, and they were the 3 people who had a special meaning among the young generation of the whole Zhongzhou state. Wang Xingxiao from the Wang family of Beihai. Gu Hanzhan from Kunlun City. Li Tianlan from Sai City. 2 had the wind and thunder veins, and 1 had the heavenly king heart. Li Tianlan might not have the title of a young heavenly son yet, but no one could deny that he had the potential of a young heavenly son. Heavenly sons were born in troubled times. Heavenly sons were born in the general trend. Would the battle of the heavenly sons of the young generation of Zhongzhou State start from today in Dongdu? The other students of the Sky Academy looked at each other, and no one spoke. Even Li Beitian and Ning Qiansheng were silent. In front of these 3 people, everyone in the young generation seemed to have a sense of inferiority. This was a competition that only belonged to the 3 of them. It seemed that the others were not qualified at all. The 3 of them stood up at the same time. As they looked at each other, the atmosphere in the room suddenly became oppressive. Bai Yuming, Horsewoman, and Flaming Fire frowned at the same time, but Gu Hanzhan and Wang Shengxiao had already stood up at the same time. It was too outrageous to ask Li Tianlan to sit back down, so they could only remain silent. I asked to act alone. Wang Shengxiao's momentum was still gentle and modest, but every syllable in his words revealed great confidence. Well, act alone. Gu Hanzhan looked calm. He was really a person who was hard to be noticed, but once he spoke, his sharpness was no less than that of the gentle and modest Wang Shengxiao. Yi Fengcheng had narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan calmly. Wang Xingxiao had now broken through to the thunder-shocking realm. A thunder-shocking realm wind and thunder veins could indeed ask to act alone. Guhan's Han was now also in the fulfillment of the fire-flaming realm. Although the Heavenly King Heart could not directly increase combat effectiveness, it had various wonderful functions, not simply improving willpower. With the Heavenly King Heart, Guhan's Han might not be the best fighter among the young generation, but he was definitely the most difficult to kill. It was not a problem for him to act alone. And Li Tianlan, although he had the wind and thunder veins, his realm was too low after all. It was understandable that he asked to act in a team, but if he really did so, others would inevitably be disappointed. The task was to survive, but some things were not unimportant. It depended on how Li Tianlan chose. Well, act alone. Under everyone's gaze, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes and chuckled, but his eyes were a little cold when he looked at Wang Shengxiao. The young heavenly son of the Wang family of Beihai, now the top expert of the young generation in Zhongzhou State, asked to act alone, which was equivalent to digging a pit for him. And it was a pit that he had to jump into. Li Tianlan smiled and said no more. Yi Fengqing took a deep look at the three people, nodded, and said in a deep voice, "Okay." On this day, after the meeting, in the heavy rain of Dongdu, Li Tianlan walked out of the Azure Pool Hot Spring Club with the Sky Attack on his back and the Human Emperor in his hand. The three heavenly sons of the young generation in Zhongzhou State set off in different directions and began to hunt. In the heavy rain, Li Tianlan took out a bottle of potion and drank it, expressionless. A fire rose in the heavy rain and broke through the curtain of rain. Chapter 139. In the eyes of the dark world, Shinjuku was undoubtedly the most famous place in Dongdu. Not only was the Dongdu government located in Shinjuku, but also the headquarters or extremely important branches of the major gangs in East Island. It was also the place with the densest special warfare agencies in East Island. In this small area, there were nearly 60 special warfare agencies gathered together, with the names of certain companies or societies in front of everyone. What was equally interesting was that Kabukicho, known as the largest red light district in Asia, was also located in Shinjuku. Nearly 6,000 bars, clubs, and massage parlors were crowded together, which was a paradise for all men. Crooks mixed with honest people. This was the current situation of Shinjuku. Walking on the streets of Shinjuku, there were only 5 kinds of people you would most likely encounter: tourists from all over the world, East Island government personnel, gang members, prostitutes, and East Island agents. This was Shinjuku, mixed but not chaotic, a funny and somewhat incredible place. From morning to night, the heavy rain in Dongdu continued, and it was even getting heavier. There were no crowds on the streets of Shinjuku, but the traffic was endless. All kinds of neon lights were flashing on the streets, and the whole Shinjuku looked a kind of blurred temptation. In the heavy rain, a young man with an umbrella walked into a roadside restaurant with a slightly hurried pace. He put away the umbrella in his hand, found a table at random, and sat down. The young man's appearance was ordinary. At best, his clean and delicate face would not attract any attention in the crowd. However, his eyes were extremely bright, and his expression was calm and gentle. He was carrying a long silver metal box on his back as he sat on the seat with a peaceful expression. Perhaps it was because of the weather, the business in the restaurant was extremely quiet. Seeing that there were guests coming in, a waitress with faint freckles on her face and a pretty and decent appearance walked over quickly and said something in Japanese with a gentle and respectful tone. The young man, who looked less than 20 years old, opened his mouth, pointed to his mouth, and smiled. His eyes were clear and a little apologetic, and he seemed to be mute. The waitress was stunned, and she felt a little sorry for him for no reason. She bowed to him and handed the menu to the young mute in front of her with both hands. Mute opened the menu, but did not look at it in detail. After pointing at the Japanese-style hot pot on the menu, he seemed to feel that it was not enough. However, due to his lack of money, he could not afford to order more meat. He simply ordered a few rice balls and then handed the menu back to the waiter. The waiter silently noted it down. She told him to wait for a moment before turning around and entering the kitchen. The young man seemed to be mute, but he wasn't deaf. After nodding, he took out a neatly folded piece of information from his pocket and silently read it. Sanluan Tungjing, male, 39 years old, was originally a senior priest of Amaterasu Shrine, a standard militarist, and the current leader of Spirit Moon's Special Operations Team. He is at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. He is perverse and cruel, fond of women. He has tortured and killed many women in the name of a priest. He is a complete psychopath. A short summary was written at the top of the document, and below the summary was a photo less than 2 inches in size. A middle-aged man with a hazy expression appeared in the photo with narrowed eyes, making people feel extremely uncomfortable. Below the photo was the recent information about Sanluan Tungjing and his current residence. The young mute narrowed his eyes and watched silently, not saying a word for a long time. Tianlan, are you in Shinjuku? There was a rustling sound in his ears, and then Bai Yoming's voice came directly through a micro-communication device. The young mute glanced around calmly. It was raining heavily outside, and he was the only one in the restaurant at this time. An East Island man, who looked to be in his 40s or 50s, was calculating the accounts behind the counter. It seemed that he was the owner of the restaurant. He lowered his eyelids and answered calmly, Sanluan Tungjing? Bai Yoming's voice came again. The communication device in Li Tianlan's ear was actually a translator with a remote communication and positioning device. Li Tianlan didn't understand Japanese, so he hunted alone in East Island. Language was a great trouble most of the time. This translation device could be said to be what he needed most in East Island. The device was small in size and could be stuffed into the ear, but the signal was extremely sharp and clear. Within a range of 20 meters, as long as it was not whispering, the translator could basically collect all the information and give feedback. It was even more convenient than a real ear. Li Tianlan was acting alone. He didn't need to speak at all. He just needed to be able to listen. This little thing was just right for him. Li Tianlan said him again. Sanluan Tungjing. Bai Yuming hesitated a little and said softly, That's the power of the shrine. Now, the young waiter had brought the hot pot over. Li Tianlan ate in silence and didn't speak. He didn't wonder why Bai Yuming knew the goal of his trip. In the hunting operation, Yi Fengsheng divided about 90 assassination targets, accounting for half of the total quota of 180 people. Wang Shengxiao, Guhan Han, and Li Tianlan each got 30 people. Although the people were different, the difficulty was roughly the same. Intentionally or unintentionally, Yi Fengsheng didn't consider the realm gap between Li Tianlan and the first two. If it wasn't because Director Yi expected and valued Li Tianlan, then the meaning behind it was somewhat meaningful. The list of 90 people assigned by the three of them was far more important than the 90 people behind them. There were many masters and they weighed a lot. If all the 90 people were successfully hunted, as the nodes disappeared one after another, the net woven by the East Island government would be mostly paralyzed. As for the other 90 people, they might be important, but their strength was relatively average, and their backgrounds were more complicated. It was most suitable for other trainees to hunt such people, and it wouldn't take up too much of the three of them's energy. In the list Li Tianlan got, there were 13 people in East Island at this time, and the rest were scattered in cities such as Ninghu, Chongdao, Sendai, and Nagoya. Among the 13 people in Dongdu, 4 of them were in Shinjuku, occupying 4 directions respectively. Sanluan Tungjing was in the north of Shinjuku. Since Bai Yuming could see his location information, it was not difficult to guess who he was going to attack. It's okay. Li Tianlan took a bite of meat and said in a very low voice. The power of the shrine in East Island was extremely powerful. This was originally a country with a high theocratic status. Although the theocratic status of East Island was under the regime and the imperial power, it was definitely a force that could not be ignored. Shintoism, Amaterasu Shrine, Ise Grand Shrine, Ishikami Shrine, and all kinds of shrines stood in great numbers, which could be regarded as a force that could not be ignored in the special warfare system of East Island. A large number of shrines in East Island had very close ties with Yasukuni Shrine, which represented the militarists of the right-wing forces. Over the years, They had even united with the right-wing forces. It could be said that they were the most radical forces inside East Island. At present, with the destruction of Night Spirit, East Island's right to speak in the dark world had also suffered a major or even a heavy blow. The government of East Island was likely to select some people and release them after integrating the foundation of Night Spirit in East Island. The right-wing forces and the Shrine forces were not suitable to hold important positions on the surface because they were too radical, but the dark world was definitely the best stage for them to play. The fact that Sanluin Tangjing controlled the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was a signal. The Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was not a behemoth, and its level was not too high. Seriously speaking, it was at most equivalent to an agency at the level of a department or bureau in Zhongzhou State. But the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was extremely special. It was a semi-official organization. To put it bluntly, it was one of the local dark forces of East Island. What was the dark world? It was not a real world. To be exact, wherever there were people of the dark world, there was the dark world. It was the same as where there were people, there would be Jianghu. In the hearts of ordinary people, this world was an ordinary, calm, and bright world. But in the eyes of some killers, agents, mercenaries, and so on, this world was the dark world everywhere. The purpose of the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group was to deal with the masters of the dark world with bad intentions in East Island. Under normal circumstances, there were only about 100 elites and staff in the Spirit Moon Special Operations Group. But as long as it was needed, countless masters of the special warfare system in East Island could enter these similar semi-official organizations and contribute to the country in their own names. The Spirit Moon Special Operations Group had even been borrowed by a master of the Invincible Realm. The importance of such an organization was self-evident. Li Tianlan put Sanluin Tangjing first on the hunting list, not only because Sanluin Tangjing's strength and position added up to 200 credits. After carefully watching the 13 preys in Dongdu, he had a general plan in his mind. Among the 13 people, there was one master at the peak of the Thundershocking Realm and 2 masters at the stabilization phase of the Thundershocking Realm. 2 masters at the fulfillment of the Fire Flaming Realm. 4 masters at the Fire Flaming Realm. As for the remaining 4, one was in the Ice Condensing Realm, and the other 3 were ordinary people who didn't know martial arts. Not to mention the Dongdu area, there were not many masters of the Thundershocking Realm and the Fire Flaming Realm on the complete list of 30 people in his hand. The reason why he chose Sanluin Tangjing was that his strength was high enough. It was better to kill him in the early stage of such a tricky task. Otherwise, when the 3 of them hunted all over East Island would be shocked, and some smart people would figure out their purpose. At that time, if they planned to assassinate the masters on the list, it would be a little difficult. Fire Flaming Realm and Thundershocking Realm. Li Tianlan thought about these 2 realms, which could be regarded as masters anywhere, and there was a dead silence in his eyes. At the beginning of the hunt, he had already taken the surge potion that Qin Weibai brought back for him through Horsewoman. In the following period, he would always have the strength of the stabilization phase of the Fire Flaming Realm. Although it was still 1 or 2 small realms lower than his previous peak strength, he had made a major breakthrough in the Qi-controlling realm before he set off from the Sky Academy. Now, during the period of the effect of the potion, if Li Tianlan gave it his all, he was not sure how terrifying his combat capability would be. Sanluin Tangjing. Li Tianlan looked at the photo on the information in his hand, narrowed his eyes, and smiled. Not only Sanluin Tangjing, but the entire theocratic force in East Island would be his priority hunting target this time. First, he would destroy the arrogance of this powerful force with a deep foundation in East Island, which would be of great benefit to his next action. In a word, you must be careful. Yi Fengcheng, the old fox, and the little fox of the Wang family of Beihai pushed you to this point together. If you can't do it, you could just withdraw. Those 2 people don't have good intentions. Bai Yuming continued. Li Tianlan gave a soft hum again. Bai Yuming suddenly changed the topic and said playfully, I forgot to tell you that people from the Deep Sea Academy are here. Well, Rushi is beside me. She wants to talk to you. Do you want to have a chat? You are engaged. Although you haven't seen each other, it's good to cultivate a relationship first. Li Tianlan stopped breathing, and his eyes were complicated. There was a silence on the other end of the communication, and then a cold but tender voice sounded. It was soft and sounded a little complicated. Qin Weibai's voice was also very cold, but compared with this voice, it had two different styles. Qin Weibai was really cold and indifferent, with a kind of high and mighty holiness and ethereal. But now this voice was still cold, but there was a kind of indescribable arrogance in it. Her voice seemed to be deliberately soft, but the arrogance was still clear and obvious. You be careful. Be careful. Dongcheng Rushi said. It seemed that she had done her duty as a fiancée. The next second, she directly cut off the communication. Dongcheng Rushi. Chapter 140. After a big dinner, before the restaurant closed, Li Tianlan walked into the rain again with an umbrella. The humidity was thick in the night. The rainstorm was getting heavier and heavier, and the bean-sized raindrops fell on the umbrella. The umbrella trembled violently, making people feel unsteady. The street lights on the cold road were still on, and there was dense water vapor beside the light, making it hazy. The whole Takeshita Street seemed to be isolated from the world in the heavy rain. Li Tianlan walked on the street unhurriedly with an umbrella, looking lonely and lonely. Takeshita Street was a clear stream in Shinjuku. Located in the north of Shinjuku, the road was wide. Not to mention when it was raining, even in a cloudless day, this street could be said to be the coldest and quietest street in Dongdu. There were no messy bars and clubs on the street. There were no noisy gangs. There were only a few restaurants, shops, a supermarket, and a small and medium-sized hospital. In addition to these necessary living places, the entire Takeshita Street was only left with some companies and societies that occupied a large area but did not even have a clear introduction of the specific work. These companies and societies that did not even have clear basic responsibilities were the real masters of Takeshita Street, or the protagonists. There were a total of 56 special warfare agencies in the Shinjuku area of Tokyo, and more than 30 of them had their headquarters set up on Takeshita Street. Nearly 5,000 special warfare operations personnel and special warfare intelligence personnel lived here, trained, and lived. When there was no large-scale operation, the whole clean street looked cold and desolate. More than 5,000 special warfare system personnel. If all of them were dispatched, Takeshita Street might become a real dragnet in an instant. Li Tianlan walked quietly along the street. His expression was getting calmer and calmer, and the road ahead was getting darker and darker. The street lights hundreds of meters ahead were completely out. Li Tianlan stopped. The street lights on Takeshita Street were on for 300 meters, and the rest was completely dark, which meant that he had officially entered the densest area of special warfare forces on Takeshita Street. This kind of darkness was liked by all killers, but the place in front of him was obviously not suitable for lurking, because in the darkness ahead, at least tens of thousands of high-definition cameras scattered in different positions were working 24 hours a day, covering the second half of Takeshita Street for thousands of meters. It was a complete joke to lurk in such a place. The street was silent and strange, and there seemed to be only the sound of rain between heaven and earth. Li Tianlan stopped where he was, leaning against the wall. In the heavy rain, lightning streaked across the sky, followed by muffled thunder. At the moment when the sky and earth turned pale under the lightning, Li Tianlan loosened the umbrella in his hand and casually pulled off the pitch-black umbrella cover. The torrential rain fell instantly. Li Tianlan, who was already in the fire-flaming realm, did not use flames to evaporate the rain around him. He saved every bit of his combat strength and let the rain drench his whole body. He took out the silver box that he had been carrying on his back. He covered part of it with a pitch-black umbrella and wrapped the other part with a black coat. After doing all this, he put the box back on his back and quickly moved forward while sticking close to the wall. A flurry of footsteps could be heard in the torrential rain. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly stopped where he was, but the little puddle of water under his feet instantly whistled forward. The ripples kept spreading forward, pushing the water higher and higher, and countless water droplets flew in the torrential rain. A patrol team in ponchos came out silently from a narrow alley less than 30 meters ahead. Although they looked a little tired, their formation was not chaotic at all. In the second half of Takeshita Street, companies were separated from each other, and there were such small alleys everywhere in the middle. This was undoubtedly the most dangerous hidden danger for security, so the major Secret Service agencies could only form a joint patrol team to patrol every alley 24 hours a day. It was said that many special warfare agencies had jointly issued an application to the Dongdu city government, requesting to demolish the residents in this alley and build the second half of Takeshita Street into an integrated large-scale industrial park. To put it bluntly, it was a super large training ground so that the major Secret Service agencies could gather together completely without any hindrance. This report not only went to the Dongdu city government, but also to the cabinet. The cabinet had approved it, and nearby residents had begun to move. Once this plan was formed, the patrol force in the second half of Takeshita Street would be greatly reduced, but the degree of safety would be greatly improved, and the difficulty of sneaking would skyrocket. But before the demolition was completed, every patrol team had to stick to their duties. With the rigid and serious nature of East Islanders in their bones, even if they were patrolling in their own territory, every patrol team would show the vigilance of a war. A lot of water splashed into the entrance of the alley with the raindrops. A patrol team of 5 people happened to appear. Countless splashes of water splashed on the raincoats of the patrol team, and the wind whistled. "What's that?" There was a cry of surprise, and the 5 people turned their heads at the same time to look in the direction from which the water splashed. And Li Tianlan, who had been standing there, had disappeared. In the alley behind the patrol team, the splashes gathered and turned into a shadow. Li Tianlan's figure had changed places with the shadow, clinging to the wall, motionless. The patrol team muttered, and they didn't think much about it since they didn't see anything and continued to patrol. Li Tianlan clung to the wall and moved quickly in the alley, constantly approaching his target location. The Spirit Moon Special Warfare Group was in the middle and front part of the second half of Takeshita Street, about a kilometer away from here. After more than a dozen alleys, he would almost arrive there. Li Tianlan moved quickly and kept changing places with the shadow. His figure was never exposed in the open space. He was always clinging to the wall, with his back against the wall behind him, avoiding the few commanding heights nearby, and kept moving forward. Elite patrols, densely packed cameras, and a sniper on a high vantage point. If he was discovered by any one of them, he would be exposed at the first time, and he would even face the encirclement and interception of more than 5,000 elites in the shortest time. Li Tianlan didn't want to see the target not die, but things had come to this point. Moreover, Sanluan Tungjing was cruel and cunning. If the assassination failed this time, it would be even more difficult to kill him in the future. At that time, it would be more difficult to kill him than today. There was another flurry of footsteps. Li Tianlan's shadow swayed slightly, and he disappeared quickly. Now his shadow formula could be said to have reached the basic level in terms of power and change. The distance of a shadow released was about 40 meters. As long as he was careful enough and used the shadow formula here, the possibility of him being discovered was very small. Passing by the second patrol team, Li Tianlan didn't stop and continued to move forward. The direction and terrain of this trip kept appearing in his mind, as if a map was gradually becoming clear and complete. Kill with one blow. Retreat unscathed. How could he retreat? He moved forward in the alley, observing the surrounding terrain, silently remembering the movement patterns of the patrol team, and then working out the retreat route before taking action. This was what an excellent assassin should do. Li Tianlan was not an assassin before, but now he was on an assassination mission, so he was an assassin. The surrounding alleys were gradually restored in his mind. Li Tianlan's pace was getting faster and faster, and he deliberately avoided the commanding heights all the way. After passing by 6 patrol teams, he finally entered the factory of the Spirit Moon Society. The layout of the factory was clean and elegant, with all the woods and flower beds. Li Tianlan moved along the woods and finally stopped at the forefront of the woods. 200 meters in front of him was a villa, which was brightly lit. But what made Li Tianlan frown slightly was that the distance of 200 meters was empty except for a flowerbed in the middle. The nearby snipers might not react very quickly, but it was impossible for them to let him rush over a distance of 200 meters without discovering his existence. He had to be fast. Li Tianlan tightened the box on his back and took a deep breath. After a nearby patrol team passed by, he suddenly rushed out of the woods. The distance of 5 meters was crossed almost in one step. 30 meters away, a shadow was formed. Switch, step, switch, changing positions. Li Tianlan's figure flickered in an instant. 3 shadows appeared and disappeared almost at the same time, and Li Tianlan's figure had appeared inside the flower bed 100 meters away. Li Tianlan's breathing was slightly rapid. Releasing 3 shadows in a row didn't consume much of his physical strength, but it consumed a lot of his willpower. But in the flower bed, his eyes were getting brighter and brighter. After a short rest, Li Tianlan's figure moved, and another shadow was about to rise. A beam of light came directly from outside the factory. A black car cut through the rain. A black Lexus entered the factory and finally stopped in front of the villa in the middle of the factory. The door opened, and 2 men in black suits got out with umbrellas. They opened the driver's compartment in the back of the car, took out 2 oversized suitcases from inside, and walked quickly into the villa. The moment the door of the villa closed, a shadow appeared on the side of the car, perfectly avoiding the commanding heights. After a short rest, another shadow appeared on the rooftop of the villa. Li Tianlan, dressed in black, lay tightly on the rooftop and moved slowly. The rain was heavy, but now as long as the snipers at the nearby commanding heights paid a little attention to him, even through the rain curtain, it was not difficult to find Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan opened the silver box behind him. Instead of taking the sky attack, he pulled out a small metal cylinder from the box, stretched it out, and gently inserted it into the ceiling. The cylinder suddenly pierced the hard ceiling, like a knife cutting tofu, silently. The signal light above the cylinder lit up, and Li Tianlan turned on a small screen temporarily installed inside the box. Through the ceiling, everything in the villa suddenly appeared on the screen. A middle-aged man whom Li Tianlan was familiar with but looked gloomier in real life than in photos appeared on the screen, with a cruel and perverted smile. Sanluan Tungjing. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and remained calm. 2 men in black suits carrying large suitcases had entered the villa and bowed deeply to Sanluan Tungjing. "Open it," Sanluan Tungjing said with a smile. "Let me see the toys tonight." The 2 men in black suits squatted down with smiling faces and opened the box directly. Sure enough, there were toys in the box. 2 slender women in shorts were curled up in the suitcase, revealing their snow-white and tender thighs. They were struggling with all their might. Their mouths were taped shut, and they could only make muffled sounds. Their eyes were filled with terror. "Priest, these are 2 women from Zhongzhou State. They came to East Island to travel. Are you satisfied with them?" A man in a black suit said carefully with a smiling face. Sanluan Tungjing smiled, squatted down, grabbed the long black hair of a woman in the box, lifted her up, and tore off the tape on her mouth. The woman screamed subconsciously. Sanluan Tungjing had already bent down and kissed the woman's rosy little mouth hard. The woman's eyes widened, and her pure and beautiful face had been completely deformed. Her eyes were full of fear. Sanluan Tungjing bit hard, and the woman's lips suddenly bled. He licked the blood on the corner of his mouth slightly and said with a sinister smile, "Yes, Ashina Sao. It's most interesting to torture and kill. Torture and kill." When the woman heard this word, she trembled more and more severely. "You 2 stay and play together." Sanluan Tungjing smiled, looked at the 2 women in front of him, and said softly, "The rain outside is too heavy. Don't be afraid. I'll play a game with you tonight. It's a very fun game." Bang! At the same time, a dull and violent gunshot, which could only belong to a sniper rifle, suddenly sounded outside the window. Li Tianlan rolled over subconsciously. In his original position, gravel splashed, and a bullet hole appeared directly. Bang! The second shot sounded again. Without hesitation, Li Tianlan grabbed the box with the sky attack on his back and punched the ceiling directly. Boom! Chapter 141. The whole villa kept shaking under the tremendous force. The ceiling had been completely cracked. Huge stones, dust, and heavy rain fell in the hall at the same time. A black figure fell along with the falling rocks. Sanluan Tungjing's pupils had contracted to the limit. In his sight, there was only a sharp silver light. The human emperor, which was more than 2 meters long, was fully extended. It cut through the air and stabbed directly at Sanluan Tungjing's head with a harsh whistling sound. It was raining heavily. A solo attack. The silver spear tip pointed straight down, and the curved spear blades on both sides of the spear tip had been completely opened. The whole spear body showed an indescribable coldness and elegance, dangerous and violent. The spear body stabbed straight down, and all the gravel turned into powder in an instant. The raindrops had condensed into icicles before they fell to the ground, surrounding Sanluan Tungjing's whole body. Fast. Everything happened in an instant. It was as fast as the wind and as powerful as the thunder. At the critical moment of life and death, Sanluan Tungjing was an expert at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. With a roar, he pulled out a sharp, soft sword from his waist in an instant. His arms swept across, and the fire scattered. The icicles that trapped him in place melted instantly, and the long spear above him arrived. Sanluan Tungjing slightly leaned sideways, and the silver spear almost stuck close to his body and stabbed straight down. The sharp spear light cut through his skin and instantly left a deep wound on his face. The long spear sank 1/2 meter into the ground. Before Li Tianlan's body landed on the ground, his hand holding the long spear suddenly lifted. In an instant, the silver light whistled up. Bang! On the ground. The floor with a radius of several meters was lifted up by Li Tianlan's spear. The wooden floor vibrated wildly, and countless pieces of wood and stones almost covered the sky and the earth and smashed towards Sanluan Tungjing. Dense, coherent, from top to bottom, and then from bottom to top there was no pause. Sanluan Tungjing didn't even have time to breathe. Before the momentum of the spear fell, the human emperor had drawn a cold arc like a full moon and smashed directly at his head. Damn it! Sanluan Tungjing roared angrily and quickly retreated. The long spear suddenly stopped, and the spear head lit up. Li Tianlan held the spear with one hand and strode forward. Straight stab. Charge. Torrential rain fell from the broken ceiling into the hall. The rain on Li Tianlan's body had completely evaporated. The dazzling fire bloomed on the spear, surging with endless heat. Shadow formula. Switch positions. The 2-meter-long spear appeared in front of Sanluan Tungjing in an instant. Sanluan Tungjing's expression changed dramatically. In his sight, the comely and calm face was instantly drawn closer. Everything in front of him seemed to have disappeared, and all he could see was Li Tianlan's eyes. It was a pair of eyes that shone brightly, revealing its sharpness, but also burning with endless madness and determination. It was a killing intent that would not hesitate to sacrifice anything. It was an indomitable will, one that would not retreat even in the face of death. Invincible, an invincible person, an invincible spear, an invincible momentum, and an invincible killing intent. The ferocious spearhead was less than 30 centimeters away from Sanluan Tungjing's chest. Blazing sun. Sanluan Tungjing's eyes suddenly condensed like never before, and the surging flames burst out all over his body. His slightly short body suddenly made a strange turn to avoid the spear. The soft sword in his hand was straightened directly, and the flames soared. Spin. Sanluan Tungjing's body almost touched the silver spear. He took a step toward Li Tianlan and raised his arm. The long sword with surging flames swept toward Li Tianlan. A calm and indifferent voice suddenly sounded. There was only one syllable, which sounded like the Chinese of the Shina people he hated most. Stop! With the place where the two men fought as the center, the air in the hall suddenly twisted and stilled for a moment. The Buddhist incantation of 9 words, stop formula. The flames on the soft sword in Sanluan Tungjing's hand suddenly paused. The blue veins on Li Tianlan's arm bulged, and the hand holding the silver spear pressed down with all its strength. Crack! In the clear sound of bones cracking, the silver spear weighing more than 50 kilograms pressed hard on Sanluan Tungjing's shoulder, and the shoulder bone broke without any suspense. Under the severe pain, Sanluan Tungjing screamed and subconsciously knelt on the ground. Wait! Before he could say a word, Li Tianlan had kicked him directly in the chest. Bang! Sanluan Tungjing's body shook violently, and his short body suddenly rose into the air. Blood spurted from his mouth and fell on the wall. Li Tianlan, who had never talked nonsense from beginning to end, did not stop the momentum of his spear at all. He switched places with the shadow for the 3rd time. The tip of the spear appeared in front of Sanluan Tungjing in the blink of an eye. At the moment when the high priest of Amaterasu's shrine opened his eyes subconsciously, the long spear rushed over. The silver tip of the spear pierced into his chest, and the blade of the spear went deep into his skin. It pierced through his chest and came out through his chest. The tip of the spear pierced into the wall through Sanluan Tungjing's body. The wall full of steel bars and concrete collapsed in an instant. All the steel bars bent like soft bread under the great force, and then broke completely. A big hole was broken in the whole wall. Bricks and stones flew. The dust fell in an instant. Sanluan Tungjing, who seemed to want to say something, was lying in the ruins with his mouth open, but his vitality had completely disappeared. The heavy rain once again soaked Li Tianlan from head to toe. Li Tianlan squinted at the body of Sanluan Tungjing in the ruins, narrowed his eyes, and whispered, "Let's talk on the way." Sanluan Tungjing opened his mouth wide, and his eyes were filled with horror. From beginning to end, this core figure of the Shinto force of East Island didn't even know why he died. Sekel, from breaking the wall to the death of Sanluan Tungjing. The whole process took less than 5 seconds. The villa had become a dangerous house, and the owner of the villa had died. Li Tianlan had no time to waste. Every second he stayed here meant more danger for him, so he didn't bother to talk nonsense with Sanluan Tungjing. He went all out as soon as he made a move. The shadow formula switched positions, and the stop formula killed. In an instant, everything was done in one go. The whole assassination process was extremely violent and smooth, without any hindrance. It was hearty. This was a real one-hit kill. Behind Li Tianlan, the 2 men in suits who were responsible for kidnapping the 2 Zhongzhou girls and looking forward to staying and playing with them finally reacted. They screamed and fled from the main entrance. Li Tianlan didn't even bother to look at them. He carried the human emperor and left directly through the hole in the wall in front of him. "Wait a minute, please." Behind him, a soft voice filled with fear and sobbing sounded. It was not very standard Japanese. Li Tianlan kept moving forward with no expression on his face. "Wait a minute, please." The soft voice continued to ring, but this time it was in Chinese. Li Tianlan stopped, but did not turn around. The girl who asked for help behind him was surprised. In a dangerous situation, she had the joy of meeting an old friend in a foreign land. She held another companion in the box who seemed to have been hit in the leg by a stone and begged, "Please, help us. We are also from Zhongzhou State." Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said calmly, "There is a car outside the main entrance. You could drive it and escape. The people here are probably looking for me now, so the defense is simple. Whether you can survive or not depends on your luck." He took a deep breath and said no more. He left the villa directly through the hole, never looking at the 2 Zhongzhou girls behind him, and didn't care about their life or death. A hero saving the damsel in distress? What a ridiculous idea. If Li Tianlan was just an ordinary Zhongzhou tourist, he might help them in this kind of situation. But what was his identity now? He was a special agent of Zhongzhou State who was on a top-secret mission in East Island. How could he save them? How dare he save them? Not only could he not save them, but what he should do now was to turn around and kill the two girls. He didn't mind saving them, but Zhongzhou State couldn't bear the consequences. The identities of these two girls were extremely transparent and clean, and such people were the easiest to investigate. Once Li Tianlan saved them, it would be a piece of cake for the East Island government to find out who Li Tianlan was. It wouldn't be so terrible if he was exposed. But if East Island operated secretly and got him together with Zhongzhou State, it would be a conspiracy in wrestling between countries. And such a fight had always been extremely bloody and tragic. In this plot of Zhongzhou State, the size of the Snowdance Corps had reached nearly 20,000 people. Once these people went out of the country, no matter whether they succeeded or failed, the high-level officials of Zhongzhou State would never admit that they had anything to do with Zhongzhou State. Naturally, no one would believe such a denial. But the important thing was that it was a reason. No matter how bullshit the reason was, it was a reason, and East Island couldn't produce any evidence. This was the fig leaf of the fight in the dark world. And once he saved the two girls, once East Island found out about them, they were very likely to take the initiative to tear down the fig leaf of Zhongzhou State and slap their faces. On the one hand, it was the young lives of the two girls. On the other hand, it was the position of Zhongzhou State in the dark world in the next few decades. What was national affairs? What was the overall situation? What was the choice? This kind of choice was cruel, but this was the general trend. He had to go with the flow and couldn't help it. Li Tianlan took a deep breath. He was not so cold-blooded as to kill people to keep their mouths shut for the time being. But he really couldn't save the two girls behind. They were on their own. Li Tianlan held the gun faster and faster, from walking to trotting, and then to striding. Every second counted. The night rain was like a curtain. The heavy rain was like a waterfall. The rain washed the silver body of the gun, and the blood gradually disappeared. In the messy footsteps, a patrol team of 5 people appeared directly in front of Li Tianlan. The human emperor closed in an instant. At the moment when no one raised the muzzle, Li Tianlan had already rushed through the formation of the 5 people. Under the heavy rain, the 5 elites stood quietly in the same place, holding their guns, motionless. Li Tianlan's figure had rushed into the woods, as fast as lightning. Spirit Moon's Special Operations Group was a semi-official special warfare agency of East Island, and it was also a special warfare agency belonging to Night Spirit. Countless experts in East Island had changed their identities in special operations groups like Spirit Moon. They were transformed into the elites of the special warfare system of East Island, or the elites of Night Spirit, or the free men of the Dark World. This position, which was not a high-ranking but extremely sensitive one, was bound to change hands after tonight. As for what Zhongzhou State could get from this change of ownership, it was not Li Tianlan's concern at all. Spirit Moon's Special Operations Group was very important. Sanluan Tingjing was also very important in his hunting target of this trip, but he was not the most important one. Even in Dongdu, in Shinjuku, Sanluan Tingjing was not the most important one. Li Tianlan shuttled quickly through the woods. The first hunting target had been completed. Chapter 142. The entire Takeshita Street took emergency actions in the heavy rain. In the villa of the headquarters at the end of the street, orders were issued one after another. Not only the patrol squads, but also some of the East Island Special Warfare elites, who had fallen asleep in the heavy rain, gathered for the first time and rushed to the location of the Spirit Moon Society. Encirclement, interception, inescapable net. Over Takeshita Street, a military low-altitude satellite with super high resolution had been fully turned on. In an instant, the picture of every corner of Takeshita Street appeared on the big screen of the headquarters at the same time. Orders were issued one after another, becoming more precise and effective. The footsteps were loud and messy. A large number of patrols rushed into the woods of the Spirit Moon Society without hesitation, and directly killed the target according to the orders they received. Under the woods, the heavy rain fell down. Blood flew up. The heavy rain did not stop, and the blood did not stop. The silver human emperor had turned into two swords. The sharp silver-white sword light and sword momentum were like a tide. As the crowd surged, they constantly flew in all directions. Wherever the sword light passed, all the trees and grasses were burning fiercely. The fire burned more and more fiercely in the heavy rain within a range of tens of meters. Some people were buried in the sea of fire, but more people were smashed by the sword light. Move forward, keep moving forward. Li Qianlon's eyes were unprecedentedly focused and bright, and the fighting intent was burning in his pupils like a raging fire. Everything in front of him was directly torn apart in the raging sword light. He moved faster and faster, and his momentum and killing intent were getting more and more violent. This was a retreat. This was an escape. But on him, there was a kind of momentum as if thousands of troops and horses were charging forward. The killing intent was majestic and unstoppable. More and more squads gathered in the direction of Li Qianlon's breakout. In his sight, the woods were coming to an end. Rushing out of the woods, it was the outside world that was densely packed with twists and turns. Li Qianlon's eyes narrowed slightly, and he held his swords tightly. Tens of meters ahead, at least 7 or 8 patrol squads gathered together roared at the same time. The endless heavy rain stopped, and an ice wall more than 20 meters long and at least 10 meters thick instantly blocked in front of Li Qianlon. "Idiot, what are you doing? He is on your left." The moment the ice wall rose, the commanders in the command center who were watching the encirclement through the big screen were the first to jump up and curse. The moment the ice wall rose, everyone only saw Li Qianlon's body shake. His body seemed to be still in the same place, but the real him had appeared dozens of meters away. Only a shadow stood where he originally stood, and after a few seconds, it dissipated. Shadow. In the command room, the oldest commander frowned. "Everyone, don't you think this scene is very familiar?" The other commanders were stunned. Sai City, Zhongzhou State, Lord of Shadow, Tribulation. The old commander said coldly and narrowed his eyes. The moment he switched places with a shadow, a second shadow appeared in front of him. Li Qianlon's figure flickered again, and he had already rushed out of the woods and into an alley. Boundless sea and sky. Just as Li Qianlon relaxed, the next second, endless light suddenly lit up, turning from extreme darkness to extreme brightness. In an instant, Li Qianlon was in a trance. Countless rays of light flashed in front of him, but they were meaningless. In the second half of Takeshita Street, every alley was lit up. This was not an ordinary light, but a bright and dazzling light like a searchlight. The dark alley suddenly turned into a dazzling whiteness. Standing in the alley, Li Qianlon was really like a firefly in the night, so conspicuous that he couldn't be more conspicuous. Bang! The sound of a large-caliber heavy sniper rifle sounded. At the same time as the gunshot sounded, Li Qianlon had quickly moved to the side. Bang! There was a big hole in the wall where he originally stood. Li Qianlon was surrounded by bright light and could not see anything. He could only hear the sound to identify the position of the sniper. But in this area of thousands of meters, there were nearly 400 snipers. In the case that he could not see, even if Li Qianlon could hear the sound to identify the position, he was in an extremely dangerous situation. Before the second gunshot sounded, Li Qianlon's figure moved slightly, and his whole body became chaotic in an instant. Small steps forward, big steps forward, small steps left, small steps back. In an instant, countless shadows flickered around Li Qianlon. His every movement was never repeated. In a trance, in the sniper's scope, the snipers could not tell whether Li Qianlon was moving forward or backward. "Shoot!" A gloomy order sounded in the ears of every sniper. How could they shoot without aiming? All the snipers tried to aim at Li Qianlon. Before the second order sounded, the sniper closest to Li Qianlon could not hold back and pulled the trigger. Bang! The long and narrow bullet shot at Li Tianlan, but it fell 3 meters away from him. Li Tianlan seemed to be motionless, but his body kept moving forward. Suddenly, his figure had entered another alley. Some snipers suddenly lost their target vision. The unique skill of Sai City Desperate Chase. This unique skill, known as the first body movement in the Dark World in recent years, was impeccable in both dodging and attacking, especially when he had the advantage of realm. Facing a group of snipers who were at most in the ice-condensing realm, or even the chi-controlling realm, as long as Li Tianlan was not courting death, the snipers could not aim at him at all. Fire at the same time. No need to aim. Shoot. The second irascible order echoed in every sniper's ears. Bang, bang, bang. Countless gunshots suddenly enveloped the alley where Li Tianlan was. Li Tianlan's figure paused. I hit him. A surprised voice sounded, but before his voice died away, Li Tianlan, who was frozen in place, had disappeared. Damn, it's the shadow again. What the hell is this? Where is he now? Who has his vision? The sniper's complaints kept ringing out. The atmosphere in the headquarters became more and more oppressive. Just a young commander looked ferocious and said coldly, just mobilize heavy firepower and flatten this area. I don't believe he can come out alive. Idiot. Don't you know how many civilians are nearby? With so many civilians dying, the Prime Minister is going to step down. Can you afford such consequences? Another commander retorted with an irritated look. The Prime Minister of East Island this time was full of courage, and amazing means. It could be said that he was their overall backer. If the Prime Minister was implicated, none of them would be well off. Heavy weapons are not advisable. The oldest commander narrowed his eyes, kept silent for a while, and said slowly, I'll go. Several other commanders were shocked. You'll go in person? The other party is not weak. You may not be his match. I'll go, it's safer. The old commander took a deep breath and made up his mind. Without hesitation, he walked out of the headquarters and said loudly, Prepare the car. Tianlan, what's the situation on your side? Li Tianlan's figure had appeared in a yard next to the alley. He found a black plastic bag in the yard and covered his glasses, treating them as sunglasses. Just after he finished all this, Bai Yoming's voice sounded in his ears. It's okay. They are breaking out of the encirclement. I can handle it. Li Tianlan said calmly. There are just too many people. Don't worry. At the other end of the communication, Bai Yoming was silent for a moment and said softly, Horsewoman and Flaming Fire are ready to pick you up. Do you want? No need. Li Tianlan directly interrupted Bai Yoming and said calmly, I can break through here. Let's not talk about it now. Bai Yoming hesitated a little and finally gritted her teeth and said, In this case, you go left. We have hacked their satellite. Although we can't see the picture, we have already got the dynamics of their area. At present, the third alley on your left has the least guards. It's just the right place to break through. Li Tianlan said, switched places with the shadow again, and appeared in another yard. At this time, every alley was full of dazzling lights. Li Tianlan couldn't see anything, nor could those patrol squads. So they were smart enough to not come in at all. They just kept sending people to block the entrances of the alleys, waiting for them. Even if he didn't go out, as long as he was blocked inside, there would soon be a master coming in to catch him. Switching places with the shadow again, Li Tianlan's body appeared in the alley. The black plastic bag covered his eyes, and everything in front of him was vague. Li Tianlan didn't stop and sprinted in the alley. The snipers who had lost their vision fired again. A large number of bullets were shot from the front and back of Li Tianlan. His figure was sometimes fast and sometimes slow in the rain of bullets, but he never stopped. The bullets were getting denser and denser. In the heavy rain, several ice walls had appeared around Li Tianlan. Countless bullets hit the ice walls. The ice walls trembled, and Li Tianlan's physical strength was constantly consumed. Bai Yoming, who couldn't see the picture at this time, said in a more urgent tone, Tianlan, hurry up. We just got the information that Miyamoto Shiny Eye has left the headquarters and intends to kill you personally. Your direction of breaking through is exactly the same as his direction of advance. Miyamoto, Shiny Eye. This was also a character on Li Tianlan's hunting list. In terms of strength and importance, Miyamoto Shiny Eye could be said to be in the top 3 on his hunting list. He was a master at the stabilization phase of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, the left priest of Amaterasu Shrine, and now the person in charge of the Night Spirit Mansion. The Night Spirit Mansion could be said to be the most important institution of Night Spirit in Dongdu. It was responsible for contacting and leading everything in Dongdu. All the forces of Night Spirit in Dongdu, whether it was the underworld, consortium, special warfare agencies, or political forces, were all based on the Night Spirit Mansion. After the destruction of Night Spirit, Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, controlled the Night Spirit Mansion. For Zhongzhou State, this was a person who must be killed, even at any cost. In Li Tianlan's current state, he didn't need to be afraid of a master at the stabilization phase of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, but a Miyamoto Shiny Eye plus thousands of special warfare elites on Takeshita Street. Li Tianlan had no chance of winning. He must break through, and he must be fast. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and around him, the broken ice walls instantly condensed together. Li Tianlan didn't hide his figure. He took countless bullets from the sniper rifle, let his physical strength be consumed quickly, and rushed straight to the alley that Bai Yuming said. At the entrance of the alley, at least dozens of special warfare elites of East Island were gathered there, ready to fight. Li Tianlan's figure rose into the air. In his sight, a thick ice wall suddenly condensed and became thicker and thicker. Li Tianlan was in the air, holding 2 swords tightly. The fire all over the sky spread wildly with him as the core, and the whole alley became a blazing orange. The sword edge spun wildly with the diffusing fire, tearing the rain curtain and the sky. The 8th blade, burning heaven. Boom! At the entrance of the alley, the ice wall, which was at least more than 5 meters thick, collapsed instantly in the blazing fire. Countless huge ice cubes flew in all directions, and a large amount of blood flew high into the sky with the broken ice cubes. Li Tianlan rushed over with 2 swords in his hands. Tianlan, hurry up! Bai Yuming took a deep breath and said in a hurry. No hurry. Li Tianlan's figure rushed quickly, but he didn't leave Takeshita Street, but rushed directly to the depths of Takeshita Street. This time, it was a bold and unexpected move. Extreme and crazy. What do you want to do? Bai Yuming's sharp voice seemed to be screaming. I don't want to do anything, Li Tianlan said calmly. I just want to kill back. You little madman. Little bastard. Who do you want to kill? Chapter 143. Going against the wall. It was an unimaginable and crazy decision. It could be said to be soul-stirring. Although East Island was a small country, their special warfare system had always been one of the most elite forces in the Dark World. Although Li Tianlan didn't kill Sanluan Tungjing for a long time, thousands of elites have been fully mobilized. The first half of the street was filled with countless special warfare elites, and the second half was filled with masters of dozens of special warfare systems. There was a real iron wall in front and behind. Everyone was waiting for Li Tianlan to hit it himself. At least in the hearts of every East Island elite, the assassin who killed priest Sanluan Tungjing could not leave tonight. But who could have thought that Li Tianlan had no intention of leaving at all? He rushed out of the alley and out of the encirclement. Li Tianlan didn't hesitate and went back directly. The 2 swords of the human emperor were put together and stretched out in a flash. A silver spear more than 2 meters long appeared in Li Tianlan's hand again. The heavy rain kept pouring on Takeshita Street. Thunder and lightning cut through the sky at the same time. In the dark environment of the second half of the street, Li Tianlan held the spear in one hand and sprinted at full speed. How important was Miyamoto Shiny Eye, who controlled the Night Spirit Mansion? It was no exaggeration to say that the Night Spirit Mansion was the hub of all the forces of the Night Spirit organization in Dongdu. Everything of the Night Spirit in Dongdu was mediated by the Night Spirit Mansion. Controlling the members of the Night Spirit Mansion was equivalent to controlling the forces of the Night Spirit in Dongdu. The East Island government was very likely to push out the Shinto forces of East Island and build a second Night Spirit with the foundation left by the Night Spirit. Whether this plan succeeded or not, Miyamoto Shiny Eye would be an important figure in it. On Li Tianlan's hunting list, under the name Miyamoto Shiny Eye, there were many red dots. The hunting list in his hand was top secret. How many people had seen it? How many people were qualified to put red dots on this list? Such a thunder-shocking realm master with a special identity was worth 600 credits in this task of the Sky Academy, almost 4 times that of Sanluan Tungjing, which showed his importance. In the communication device in his ear, Bai Yoming's sharp voice was still ringing, but Li Tianlan turned a deaf ear. All the sounds disappeared in his ears, and the scenery on both sides of the street was constantly retreating. Li Tianlan's eyes gradually became dead, deep and quiet. A bright headlight cut through the night and rain in an instant. Hundreds of meters away, several cars with headlights on were rushing in Li Tianlan's direction at full speed. The two sides were 300 meters apart. The traffic did not stop. Li Tianlan kept going. The distance between them shortened rapidly. At this time, in this place where special warfare agencies gathered, even if it was not Miyamoto Shiny Eye who rushed out in a car, it was definitely a master who came to kill him. There was no need to stand on ceremony. Li Tianlan carried the sky attack on his back, held the long spear in his hand tightly, and rushed directly toward the vehicle hundreds of meters away. His speed was getting faster and faster. The fierce wind was whistling around him, and the falling rain was blown away by the strong wind. Li Tianlan's eyes were getting quieter and quieter. Essence, chi, and spirit had completely merged into one. 200 meters, 150 meters, 120 meters. 3 cars driving side by side finally found Li Tianlan with a silver spear in his hand. Priest Miyamoto, we found an assassin. He's rushing towards us. Ha, what a joke. Does he want to use his body to compete with our vehicle? Maybe the stupid Chinese people think that the quality of the cars we use is the same as those inferior vehicles exported to Zhongzhou State. In a black Toyota in the middle, Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, was expressionless. In his sight, the figure with endless fierceness and killing intent crashed straight over, moving forward with a momentum that was enough to tear everything. Changed the formation of the vehicle and hit him directly. Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, said coldly, and his tone was cold and vicious. Kill him. With his voice, the position of the 3 cars that were originally arranged horizontally and side by side suddenly changed. The off-road vehicle on the left of the Toyota directly overtook Miyamoto, Shiny Eye's car, and the vehicle on the right was slightly behind. The 3 cars changed from horizontal to vertical and suddenly accelerated. Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, quietly straightened his body, and his eyes were cold. This priest to the left, whose position was second only to the high priest in the Amaterasu shrine, was nearly 60 years old. His strength in the stabilization phase of the thunder-shocking realm was hopeless to continue to improve, but in recent years, his state had always been at the peak. The old man's hair had become sparse, and there were some wrinkles on his face. But his momentum did not show the slightest sign of aging. It was a kind of fierce and cold momentum, overflowing with sharpness, which could be called extraordinary. The off-road vehicle in the front row had blocked his sight, but in his mind, the figure holding a silver spear fearlessly charging became clearer and clearer. Idiot courting death. He gently raised the corner of his mouth and said indifferently. The distance between the 2 sides was getting closer and closer. 90 meters, 80 meters. Li Tianlan strode wildly and suddenly lifted the long spear in one hand. His body was completely stretched in an instant, and a dense sound like firecrackers suddenly sounded from him. In an instant, every joint of Li Tianlan's body was shaking wildly, and the sound was like thunder. The terrible power instantly condensed on his right hand holding the long spear. Li Tianlan rushed forward with the spear. Vibration. Countless joints were still shaking violently, densely packed together. 60 meters. A dazzling fire like the sun lit up from the body of the silver spear, and the surrounding rainstorm instantly evaporated into nothingness. Li Tianlan raised the spear over his head. The fire rushed into the sky. 50 meters. Li Tianlan's joints suddenly shook, and a sound like a dragon's roar spread in his body. Li Tianlan raised the long spear high, made a standard throwing gesture, and threw it hard. The spear with all his strength was thrown out directly. The fire all over the sky broke out in an instant. It was raining heavily in Dongdu, but there was only fire on the battlefield. With the human emperor as the core, endless fire was released almost unreservedly. The fire was raging and violent, and the sky within a radius of tens of meters turned into a fiery red in an instant. The silver spear burst forward. It crossed a distance of 50 meters, with an almost eternal violence and majesty. It was like the power of heaven and earth. Boom! The tip of the spear was inserted into the intake grill of the off-road vehicle in front with a large fire. The off-road vehicle, which had a speed of more than 120 kilometers per hour, suddenly stopped. The next second, the whole car was lifted by the huge force. The car flew into the air, the top of the car was down, and it smashed into the Toyota behind. The fire was raging all over the sky. The two cars kept retreating under the almost exaggerated power of the long spear, and finally collided with the third car behind. The engine kept roaring. The three cars crowded together and retreated for 7 or 8 meters. In the raging fire, the off-road vehicle, whose front had been completely deformed, swelled slightly and exploded directly with a loud bang. Thick black smoke rose amidst the flames. The three cars exploded one by one, like 3 groups of fireworks, which was indescribably spectacular in the heavy rain. Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, jumped out of the car with his assistant for the first time, but the other elites in the 3 cars were obviously not so lucky. They were all buried in the fire in the explosions one after another. Li Tianlan's figure had disappeared. Miyamoto, Shiny Eye's face was gloomy and indifferent. The assistant who mocked Li Tianlan the most in the car just now looked around nervously. The power of this spear seemed to be in the fire-flaming realm, but in terms of power, it had surpassed countless thunder-shocking realm experts. How could he be a master of the fire-flaming realm? He was simply a monster. Priest Miyamoto, could he have such strength? The assistant suddenly trembled, and his face was more pale and desperate. Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, stood quietly in place. His eyes were dignified and serious. He did not look around, but stared at the fire caused by the car explosion in front of him. The heavy rain fell. The fire was gradually suppressed. The billowing smoke rose. A figure with a silver spear walked out of the rolling smoke and fire, not fast or slow, but the killing intent was soaring. The smoke and fire rose behind him. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold and deep, and the extremely condensed killing intent was slowly released from him. Under the smoke and heavy rain, he stood with a spear, like a god of war. "Who are you, your excellency?" Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, was instantly covered with lightning. Countless electric arcs crackled and flowed on him. His body stopped more and more, and his momentum soared. "Miyamoto, Shiny Eye?" Li Tianlan lifted the spear and asked softly. His tone was soft and calm, even with a hint of unreal smile, cold and illusory. Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, felt more and more dangerous. The huge sense of oppression was like a wildfire occupying all his senses. The lightning on his body became more and more dazzling, but he did not dare to move. In the headquarters, he was right. Other commanders were no match for Li Tianlan. But what he did not expect was that even he seemed to be no match for Li Tianlan. He took a deep breath and said reluctantly, "Your Excellency." Before he finished his words, the old priest's eyes had contracted instantly. Li Tianlan's long spear had been raised. The flames raged in the heavy rain, and the human emperor weighing hundreds of kilograms slammed down with the dull sound of wind and thunder. After a full spear, Li Tianlan's will and fighting intent had been at the real peak state. In this situation, there were pursuers in front and behind, and Li Tianlan was too lazy to talk nonsense. Finish it quickly. Li Tianlan stepped forward with the spear and attacked wildly. Holy thunder! Miyamoto's shiny eye, who had already been fully prepared, did not hesitate and directly used the unique skill of Amaterasu's shrine. His hands shook, and a giant sword made of ice appeared in his hands. Inside the ice sword, there was lightning. Miyamoto's shiny eye held the sword above his head with one hand, facing Li Tianlan's long spear, and did not retreat half a step. Bang! The spear collided with the sword, and countless ice chips flew. The ice sword was smashed by the spear without any suspense. Fire and lightning flew out at the same time. Li Tianlan's figure had strode into the messy light and shadow, and a spear swept. Attack! The silver spear danced like a dragon. The horrible killing intent broke out onto the rain. Li Tianlan's eyes were shining, and his every move showed a kind of determination and madness to tear everything. Wherever the silver spear went, there was nothing that could not be destroyed. Miyamoto, shiny eye's hands condensed into a shield. The light shield was broken under the spear. The electric knife had not yet been raised, and wherever the silver spear passed, the blade had dissipated. Countless long swords made of lightning condensed into a formation behind Miyamoto's shiny eye and rushed straight to Li Tianlan. Under the heavy rain, the silver light whistled, and the spear body opened and closed. One after another, the long swords burst under the silver spear. Countless lightning rushed to Li Tianlan, but they were swallowed by the fire. In the fire, the silver spear kept moving forward. It kept moving forward. Fire flaming suppressed, thunder shocking realm. And it was an absolute suppression. Domineering spear, domineering person. Li Tianlan seemed to have completely gone mad. His offensive was getting faster and faster, with a kind of almost invincible madness and domineering, destroying everything and suppressing everything. Miyamoto, shiny eye's counterattack was getting weaker and weaker. One after another, the lightning passed through the flame, and a small amount of lightning hit Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked cold and hard, and he did not retreat. Miyamoto's shiny eye, who was getting more and more embarrassed, looked desperate and ruthless, and his body, which had no way to retreat, suddenly stopped. Kacha! The silver spear fell without any pause, ruthless and ruthless. The extremely heavy spear body fell on Miyamoto, shiny eye's shoulder with the fire. Miyamoto, shiny eye, screamed fiercely, and one of his arms was smashed down by the spear and fell to the ground, dripping with blood. At the same time, Miyamoto, shiny eye, endured the severe pain and roared with resentment. Amaterasu! Amaterasu! The strongest unique skill of Amaterasu's shrine. There was thunder rolling down in the sky. Blood sprayed from Miyamoto, shiny eye's shoulder. Before one of his arms fell to the ground, his body had suddenly swelled up. The unprecedented bright lightning condensed in front of him, and finally turned into a dazzling ball of light like a star. Miyamoto's shiny eye's face was ferocious. The unique skill, Amaterasu, the strongest unique skill, was also the unique skill with the greatest cost. This move was equivalent to self-destruction. Once this move was used, even if he could survive this battle, there was no hope for thunder-shocking realm. It was already a great luck to be able to maintain in the fire-flaming realm, but it was better than death. Go to hell, bastard! Miyamoto, shiny eye, sneered. The arm that left his body finally fell to the ground. The light ball surrounded by infinite lightning was pushed out by Miyamoto, shiny eye, with one hand. The light ball instantly expanded, burst, and formed a large light curtain, covering Li Tianlan's whole body. Li Tianlan stood with the spear. He took a step forward. Starting from his feet, the fire on his body disappeared instantly in the lightning. Countless lightning fell on him, and in the blink of an eye, his body was torn into pieces. Miyamoto's shiny eye did not look at the result and turned to escape. A figure with a silver spear appeared directly behind him. At the moment when he turned around, the two looked at each other. Miyamoto's shiny eye instantly felt cold. The power is good, but can't you find where I am? Li Tianlan, who changed positions with the shadow at the critical moment, smiled and raised the long spear. There were two shadows exactly like Li Tianlan appeared in front of Miyamoto's shiny eye, and at the same time, they raised the long spear. Li Tianlan looked indifferent and said softly, "Crack." Buddhist incantation of 9 words, crack formula, the first in single lethality and outbreak. 3 long spears pierced into Miyamoto, shiny eye's chest at the same time. Li Tianlan's body disappeared. 2 shadows rushed through Miyamoto, shiny eye's body. Bang! In the dull sound, Miyamoto's shiny eye, who was covered with blood, shook slightly, and his body suddenly burst into countless flesh and blood. Chapter 144. As a country with a large population but severely limited military power, the existence of the Dark World could be said to be in line with the interests of East Island. In this paranoid and serious country, the people here might be crazy, perverted, or disgusting, but the almost rigid paranoia made many people in this country have a kind of toughness that ordinary people didn't have. So East Island never lacked superiors. Grandmaster of Kendo, Grandmaster of Saber, Supreme Ninja God, in every generation of East Island, these 3 titles had never been vacant. That was to say, in hundreds of years, even when East Island was at its lowest, there were at least 3 superiors of the invincible realm in the country. But East Island's martial arts were too extreme, close to the devil's path. When people were young, they excessively squeezed people's potential, but they couldn't get an effective supplement. So although East Island never lacked superiors of the invincible realm, few of them could be in the top of the divine list. Even the number 1 superior of East Island today, Tianhai Wuji, the Grandmaster of Kendo who used Saber, was only in the top 10 of the divine list, and there was still a long way to go to the top 5. But East Island didn't care about this at all. In the world, it could be said that it was the country that paid the least attention to individual heroism. What they needed were superiors of the invincible realm, but not absolute superiors who were invincible in the world. In this country's idea, only teamwork was invincible, just like a pack of wolves. Superiors of the invincible realm were like the Wolf King. With the ferocious and cunning wolves, such a team could play a much more important role than a single person on any occasion. This was the idea of East Island. The whole special warfare system of East Island was like a complete machine, and the superiors of the invincible realm were the most critical engine. But even if the superiors of the invincible realm weren't there, the machine could still operate at the fastest speed. In the heavy rain in Dongdu, with the chaos on Takeshita Street in Shinjuku, the whole Dongdu took action at the same time. A large number of elites and superiors began to gather on Takeshita Street. High-performance vehicles rushed out of the rain one after another, faster and faster. The headquarters villa on Takeshita Street was already a pool of blood. 5 commanders of the fire-flaming realm all fell in the command room, and everyone died with their eyes wide open. Li Tianlan, who rushed into the headquarters villa, had disappeared. But orders were still passed down through the headquarters one after another, precise and clear, but in fact, they were meaningless. Time difference. After a perfect counterclockwise murder, Li Tianlan also created a time difference without any loopholes. After rushing out of those alleys that seemed to be hidden but were actually traps, no one would have thought that Li Tianlan would be so crazy that he not only didn't break out of the encirclement, but still went to the depths of Takeshita Street to kill. His going against the flow was equivalent to leaving countless East Island elites who blocked him in front of him behind. And with the speed of his charge, it was enough to make most of the East Island elites burst into tears. For Miyamoto, shiny eye, Li Tianlan attacked with all his strength without reservation. After a moment of confrontation between the two sides, when the elites of East Island arrived at the scene, Li Tianlan had already rushed to the headquarters. The back of the street was the place where the masters gathered. Although there were ordinary elites, the number was too small. Such a small number caused some trouble for Li Tianlan, but it could not stop him from breaking out of the encirclement at all. The entire line of defense behind the street was scattered and almost collapsed by him. In the heavy rain, Li Tianlan broke out of the encirclement calmly and disappeared, until it was confirmed that Li Tianlan had left Takeshita Street. By Yu Ming, who had been paying close attention to all this, was still beating violently. Li Tianlan's action was completely beyond her expectation. But all this seemed crazy in the eyes of others, but in his heart, it was his absolute confidence in his own strength. Fire Flaming Realm. This kind of abnormal fire flaming realm made by Yu Ming, a real genius of the thunder-shocking realm, a little numb. According to the information she got, Li Tianlan was still in the chi-controlling realm, not even the peak. Could it be that a month of special training could really make him break through 2 realms? How is this possible? But it was obviously not the time to investigate Li Tianlan's realm. Li Tianlan got away safely. Bai Yuming didn't even scold him, but calmly asked, Tianlan, what's your next plan? Go to Ninghu. Li Tianlan calmly said, kill Dubian Xiangyuan. Dubian Xiangyuan. Bai Yuming was silent for a while. If she remembered correctly, Dubian Xiangyuan was also a very important figure on the hunting list in Li Tianlan's hand. His importance was even no less than that of Miyamoto Shiny Eye. Li Tianlan now obviously picked the most difficult bones to bite. This person is not easy to kill. Bai Yuming thought for a while and said slowly, it will be more difficult to kill him in the future. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Everything on Takeshita Street tonight indicated that the special warfare system of East Island had been invaded by hostile forces. The lists in the hands of the 3 young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State were extremely targeted. As long as the East Island government was not stupid, it could know their purpose with a little speculation, and then it could also have an idea of who they might want to kill. Before the East Island government intended to protect those important figures, Li Tianlan had to get rid of the most difficult bones. Otherwise, with their status in East Island would send heavy troops to protect them, and the possibility of him succeeding would be much lower than now. Bai Yuming said no more, but calmly said, you now have about half an hour to evacuate Shinjuku. We have just successfully invaded the headquarters of Takeshita Street and are issuing false orders. But East Island will soon find something wrong. Leave quickly before they surround Shinjuku. Li Tianlan said yes, walked to a black car on the roadside, and reached out to pull the door. Crack! The locked door was suddenly pulled open by him with one hand. The alarm sounded. Li Tianlan carried the sky attack behind him, got into the car, and left quickly. In short, be careful. You can give up the task when you can't do it. Your life is more important than the hunting task in many people's hearts. Bai Yuming chuckled, and her tone gradually became cold. Rushi participated in the second batch of hunting with other members of your East Emperor Palace, and she paused and said with a smile, it's time for us to act. We can't let you young people risk your lives outside. Li Tianlan was silent. Obviously, the thunder-shocking realm experts of Zhongzhou State, who were still in Azure Pool Hot Spring, gave a hunting task to the young people, not because they wanted to watch the show, but because they also had their own tasks. The black car moved forward in the heavy rain. Li Tianlan held the steering wheel and kept accelerating. The heavy rain and strong wind. The waves in Dongdu were monstrous, and they were about to spread to the whole East Island. At the same time, in the central area of Dongdu, under the heavy rain, in a seemingly ordinary clubhouse, the raging fire burned everything fanatically. An ordinary-looking young figure was now emitting sword light all over his body. He held a sword in one hand, and the sword light kept splashing in the twisting fire. The blood all over the sky drifted from the enclosed area of the clubhouse to the quaint courtyard, and there were corpses all the way. The young man, with an ordinary face, looked calm. More and more people besieged him. The young man swept all the way and was about to approach the door. The young man, who had been killing silently all the time, suddenly roared, and his voice shook the sky. His body instantly soared into the sky in the heavy rain. The fire in the air surged wildly, and a large number of lights and shadows rose to the sky. The young man let go. He abandoned the sword. The long sword didn't fall, but strangely hung in the air and kept spinning. In an instant, all the long swords beside the countless corpses on the ground floated up with the young man. Dozens of swords. In a constantly flowing blood, the bright and unparalleled sword light suddenly condensed. In the next second, the young man, who had been killing the enemy with his strength since the beginning of the war, finally showed his realm. A shocking thunderbolt seemed to pierce the ground directly from the sky. On the giant sword that was waving a large area of sword light, the dazzling thunderbolt suddenly bloomed with countless electric lights. At that moment, Miyazawa saw the giant sword in the young man's hand. It was a giant sword with a broad blade of nearly 2 meters. It looked heavy and steady, with a kind of almost violent dominance and power. The moment the giant sword appeared in Miyazawa's pupils, the electric lights rushed up to the sky. Miyazawa suddenly screamed, turned around, and ran. He didn't even have the courage to make a move, and ran away directly. He knew that sword. He also knew this unique skill. The famous sword of the Wang family of Beihai. Firmament. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai. Sword listens to thunder. Behind him, countless electric lights connected heaven and earth. At least dozens of elites were turned into a pile of charcoal in the blink of an eye. Before the sword light disappeared, Wang Shengxiao's body had directly shortened the distance between him and Miyazawa. He held the giant sword Firmament, which was a little terrifying, in one hand and raised the other hand. An electric arc bloomed in his hand. Wang Shengxiao's palm suddenly fell. The unique skill of the Wang family of Beihai, deceiving Taoist sword. The tiny electric arc instantly extended to a distance of tens of meters, but the tiny arc seemed to illuminate everything in the base. The electric arc lit up in an instant and disappeared in an instant. Only a ray of light pierced through Gongzhe's body, which was covered in electric sparks. It was like a rainbow piercing through the sun. Miyazawa's body slightly stiffened. In the next second, his body instantly exploded, and the flesh and blood all over the sky directly evaporated in the high temperature. Only a piece of black ash fell on the ground and was instantly washed away by the rain. At 3:00 in the morning, the 3 attacks in Shinjuku District, Chiyo District, and the central area completely shocked the whole Dongdu. The Prime Minister's residence, the Imperial Palace, and the military all got the news. The Dongdu Self-Defense Force was safe and sound. But all the dark forces of East Island and Dongdu all took action to trace the whereabouts of the murderers of the 3 attacks. Under the wind and rain in East Island, wild waves suddenly rose. Chapter 145. It was the 3rd hour after the 3 murders in Dongdu. In the heavy rain that had lasted for a day, 2 Toyota SUVs drove out of the downtown area of Dongdu and headed for the Holy Mountain in the southwest of Dongdu with a clear purpose. The Holy Mountain was called Hibiscus Peak. It was close to the Pacific coast and covered with snow all year round. It was one of the symbols of the whole East Island and one of the largest active volcanoes in the world. It was the Holy Mountain in the hearts of all the people of East Island. The Divine Wind Force, the central organization of the Special Warfare System of East Island, was located on the Holy Mountain. The 2 off-road vehicles followed the mountain road all the way up. As the height rose, it seemed that even the rainstorm had lessened a little. In the distance where the mist was dense, the snow-covered Hibiscus Peak looked elegant and holy. However, against the backdrop of the night, there was an additional trace of gloomy beauty. The vehicles entered the mountainside, made a turn, and drove into an area that was not open to tourists on weekdays. Then they continued to go up. After 500 meters, the first sentry post appeared. Sentinels in special white military uniforms that almost blended with the snow raised their guns and stepped forward. The windows of the 2 cars were rolled down. Facing the sharp and vigilant sentinels, the driver did not show his ID, but only showed two badges. One was luxurious, and the other was ancient. The sentinels, who were on guard, stood up straight and saluted reflexively. Without saying a word, they waved their hands to let them go. If these two badges appeared in front of ordinary soldiers, 9 out of 10 people would not recognize them. But here was the Divine Wind Force, the power center of the special warfare system of East Island, the headquarters of the most powerful and elite special warfare force in East Island. For everyone here, these two badges were worth dying for. The luxurious badge represented the office of the Prime Minister, and the ancient badge represented the royal family. Even if a beggar held these two badges, they would unreservedly offer their loyalty, even their lives. The SUVs moved forward side by side. After passing 2 more sentry posts, a snow city appeared in front of the 2 SUVs. This was indeed a city in the snow. Although the city walls were extremely short, through the rain and snow, the inside of the city walls could be said to be vast. In the center of the short city walls was a tower up to 6 or 7 meters high. On the tower, the 2 Japanese characters Divine Wind were as red as blood and looked very eye-catching. There were very few guards on the city wall in the heavy rain. In the center of the city gate below the tower, a figure in a tight black suit with a headscarf on his head stood quietly. He carried a katana on his back. In the white snow, the black figure was clear and blurry. At first glance, he looked like a statue, standing at the city gate, ancient and silent. The 2 off-road vehicles that were about to enter the city stopped abruptly. The car door opened. 2 middle-aged men from East Island, who looked to be in their 40s or 50s, got off at the same time and walked quickly to the black figure in front of the city gate. Huge snow stepped on the snow, making a crisp sound. In front of the city gate, the black figure in black clothes suddenly opened his eyes. An indescribable sense of danger suddenly burst out from him. It was not a horrible sore intent, but a kind of tenacity and gloominess that made people breathless. His eyes were bright, but the light was extremely obscure. As the light flowed, it seemed to be full of blood and darkness. The 2 middle-aged men who were about to walk in front of him froze and subconsciously stopped 10 meters away. "Your Highness Miyamoto, why are you here?" A middle-aged man whispered in surprise, with undisguised respect in his tone. Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liohua Palace in East Island, the commander-in-chief of the Divine Wind Force, and the only supreme ninja in the martial arts world of East Island. Shinichi Miyamoto, who was in charge of the Divine Wind Force all year round, unexpectedly appeared outside the city gate in the heavy rain tonight. Obviously, he was not here to welcome them, even if they were representing the Mikado and the Prime Minister. Waiting for someone. The bright light in Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes gradually became peaceful. He stood still, letting the heavy rain fall, and said in a hoarse voice, "Matsushita and Zwaha came here late at night. Is it an order from His Majesty and the Prime Minister?" In recent years, because of the existence of Night Spirit in East Island, the Divine Wind Force didn't have many opportunities to go out to carry out tasks directly. Shinichi Miyamoto was not very familiar with the 2 men standing in front of him at this time, but he could vaguely remember their names. These 2 men didn't have any actual positions in the Imperial Palace and the Prime Minister's residence, but they were one of the most important aides of the Mikado and the Prime Minister. They came to Divine Wind in the rain late at night, so something important must have happened. "Yes, Your Highness Miyamoto. Something important happened in Dongdu tonight. His Majesty and the Prime Minister think it's time for the Divine Wind Force to serve East Island." Song Xiang lowered his head, and his tone became more and more respectful. As the confidant of the Mikado, he looked ordinary and plain, and he had a scholarly air about him that matched his identity as an aide. He was like a senior scholar, which made people feel very comfortable. He was less than 50 years old this year, and among the aides of the Mikado, he was really young and vigorous. All the information showed that within 5 years, Song Xiaoying was very likely to become the chief of the aides of the Mikado. In the whole East Island, He could be said to be a very important figure. Shinichi Miyamoto was calm and collected, and his eyes were as calm as snow. He lowered his eyelids and became quiet again. When this supreme ninja of the invincible realm was motionless, not to mention his momentum, even his vitality seemed to be completely restrained, like a dead thing. Your Highness Miyamoto, a few hours ago, there were murders in Chiyo District, Central District, and Shinjuku District. We have confirmed that, including Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, 3 superiors of the Thunder-Shocking Realm have been killed in their own districts, more than 10 superiors of the Fire-Flaming Realm died, and countless ordinary elites were killed and injured. There were 3 murderers. At present, we can confirm that the one who killed Miyazawa Xiong in Chiyo District is Wang Shengxiao, the heir of the Wang family of Beihai. And the one who appeared in the Central District is very likely to be Guhan's Han, the heir of Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State. We can't confirm the murderer in Shinjuku District yet. We found some videos in Shinjuku District, and we can only confirm that the murderer is also a young man, but the specific identity is unknown. Zhuo Hongxin, who came from the advisor group of the Prime Minister's residence, said in a cold tone. Different from Song Xiaoying, who looked very kind, Zhuo Hongxin's face was gloomy, and his momentum was extremely cold. Although the advisors of the Prime Minister's residence did not hold specific official positions, they often handled some administrative affairs for the Prime Minister. After staying with the Prime Minister for a long time, Zhuo Hongxin naturally had an unusual momentum. But at this time, standing in front of Shinichi Miyamoto, the supreme ninja of heaven, all his domineering and elegant demeanor were deliberately restrained. The Wang family of Beihai? Zhongzhou State? Shinichi Miyamoto suddenly opened his eyes and subconsciously took a step forward. The snow under his feet was pockmarked by the rain, but the place where Shinichi Miyamoto originally stood was flat, not even a footprint, leaving no trace in the snow. Song Xiaoying and Zhuo Hongxin bowed at the same time. If that's the case, things will be very troublesome. Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and said slowly. The aura that he had restrained to the extreme was released slowly, as if endless darkness was falling on the holy mountain. The darkness swallowed the snow and the rain, and the whole world seemed to be in darkness. Shinichi Miyamoto looked serious. Song Xiaoying and Zhuo Hongxin also looked serious. If things were really as they thought, then this time it was more than troublesome. Zhongzhou State was going to change dramatically. The governor of Samsara challenged the god of war of Zhongzhou State, which had attracted the attention of the whole world. Currently, a large number of masters and elites of East Island had all gone to Zhongzhou State. East Island's Special Warfare Force and master teams were in a state of fatal weakness. Did Zhongzhou State still have the power to plot against East Island at this time? Wang Shengxiao, Guhan's Han, they were the famous young heavenly sons in the whole dark world. And the third person who appeared in Shinjuku tonight, was he a hidden figure of the young generation of Zhongzhou State? Was everything that happened tonight a small, individual operation, or a prelude to a large-scale invasion? If it was just a prelude, then it could only mean that when countless masters of East Island sneaked into Zhongzhou State, a large number of elites of Zhongzhou State also entered East Island. Once this speculation was established, Shinichi Miyamoto's face suddenly turned darker. Everyone thought that Zhongzhou State was going to change dramatically. Under such circumstances, Zhongzhou State still dared to send forces to East Island, which could only mean that it was impossible for Zhongzhou State to change dramatically. The master of Samsara Palace and the god of war of Zhongzhou State would fight, but they wouldn't fight to the death. Samsara and Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island? What about the 2 invincible realm masters and a large number of experts who had entered Zhongzhou State? The rain was pouring heavily. Shinichi Miyamoto felt cold all over. Investigate. The supreme ninja of East Island stayed silent for 5 minutes, and then said in a cold tone, investigate the movements of the 12 super masters of Samsara and all the entry and exit records of East Island in the past month. The young heavenly sons of the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City entered East Island, and I'm afraid there are a lot of elites of Zhongzhou State with them that we haven't found. We have to find out. The Divine Wind Force will be dispatched immediately. Mr. Songsha, Mr. Zhuohe, what's the order of His Majesty and the Prime Minister? Songxiang paused and said slowly, His Majesty and the Prime Minister mean that we must control Wang Shengxiao, Guhan's Han, and the young man who committed murder in Shinjuku. These three are likely to be the core of the next generation of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. If the worst happens, they will be very important hostages. Shinichi Miyamoto nodded expressionlessly and said, The Divine Wind Force is qualified for this task. In addition, tell His Majesty the Mikado and the Prime Minister that I suggest waking up the Kusanagi force immediately, just in case. The faces of the two top aides from the Imperial Palace and the Prime Minister's residence changed dramatically, but they didn't dare to say anything. They hurriedly turned around, got on the off-road vehicle, and left quickly. Both of them felt that it was ridiculous to wake up the Kusanagi force, but it was obvious that Shinichi Miyamoto's sense of crisis was much stronger than theirs. They had to convey this very important suggestion to their master as soon as possible. Shinichi Miyamoto watched the two off-road vehicles leave. He forcibly suppressed the urge to go back and give orders, and quietly waited where he was. The storm was howling in the air. In a very distant place, the rain seemed to tilt slightly and then stop. Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes froze, and he remained calm. The rain all over the sky seemed to be getting smaller and smaller, and finally disappeared completely 1 second later. The storm was still raining heavily in front of the city, but there seemed to be a domain around Shinichi Miyamoto, and all the rain disappeared without a trace. Miyamoto, long time no see. A soft and almost demonic voice rang out, echoing between the snow and the storm, misty and uncertain. Shinichi Miyamoto suppressed his inner agitation and said flatly, You're the #1 killer on the killer list. Now that you've come to the Divine Wind Force, don't you dare to show up in front of me? Oh. Provocation doesn't work on me. This is the Divine Wind Force, and Miyamoto has opened his domain. I have to keep a low profile. Although it's a little rude, I believe Miyamoto can understand, right? The evil and soft voice continued to ring out, echoing softly between heaven and earth. The #1 killer in the Dark World and the only killer of the Invincible Realm, codenamed Evil. No one knew why he showed up in East Island, not even Shinichi Miyamoto. However, the Supreme Ninja of East Island obviously didn't have the patience to say more. He said impatiently, Evil, if you have anything to say, just say it. I don't have time to chat with you here. In the void of the rainstorm, Evil's voice echoed in Shinichi Miyamoto's ears. It's just a small matter. I want to invite Miyamoto to Zhongzhou State to help me kill someone. What do you think? Shinichi Miyamoto's heart skipped a beat, and then he sneered, Why should I help you? An inexplicable request. What if I say that the person I'm going to kill this time is completely in the interest of East Island? Evil's voice seemed to be a little lower. Once this person dies, the Samsara Palace will. The Wang family of Beihai, Kunlun City, and Sai City will all fall out with each other. Maybe this is what you want to see, right? Shinichi Miyamoto was expressionless, but his eyes narrowed. I didn't know there was such a person in Zhongzhou State. I didn't know before either. According to my employer, he only appeared recently. He's just a young ant. Evil smiled and said calmly. Shinichi Miyamoto's patience was wearing thin, and his eyes were getting colder and colder. He did not have any friendship with Evil. It was inexplicable that Evil came to him. Moreover, Evil was a young non-entity that had just appeared, but it was related to the balance of the superpowers in Zhongzhou State. Could it be more ridiculous? And even if there was such a person, how could Evil find him? It was illogical. Are you done? Shinichi Miyamoto frowned and said slowly, Don't think what I said is absurd. You should think about it. The person I'm going to kill is a non-entity, but the person behind him is not to be underestimated. Even I don't have the confidence to escape unscathed if I act alone. Miyamoto, the reason why I found you is not only to invite you to Zhongzhou State, but also to cooperate with Tianhai Wuji and Lusheng Sanchuan through you. There's also an invincible realm expert, and even a murderous weapon to cooperate with us. 5 invincible realm experts and a murderous weapon. Do you think it's a joke? Evil said calmly. The reason why I found you is that I like your ninjutsu. But what I value more is that the 2 invincible realm experts in East Island are in Zhongzhou State now. If this cooperation is successful, it's definitely a win-win situation. If it fails, we'll be doomed eternally. I can guarantee the authenticity of every word I say with everything I have. It depends on whether your Empire of East Island dares to gamble for the fate of the country. Of course we dare. Shinichi Miyamoto sneered. But why do I think you dare to gamble for such a dangerous plan? Evil sighed softly and said leisurely, anyone will go crazy for a reward of $10 billion, right? Maybe I can retire completely after what I did last night. $10 billion. Shinichi Miyamoto's heart shook fiercely. If what Tribulation said was true, it was enough to prove that the person he killed on this trip was really not a small matter. And how could a force that could pay $10 billion to kill a person be ordinary? A young ninity who was related to the overall situation of Zhongzhou State? Shinichi Miyamoto took a deep breath and said calmly, who is this person? The new young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan. Evil was silent for a while and chuckled. The wind and thunder veins with unlimited potential. If I can end my last assassination with his blood and life, it will be perfect. The new young heavenly son? Li Tianlan? Wind and thunder veins? Shinichi Miyamoto's eyes twitched slightly. At this moment, he suddenly thought of the information brought by Song Xia-ing and Zhua Hengxin. Wang Shengxiao appeared in Chiyo District. Gu Hantan appeared in the central area. He appeared in Shinjuku District. He narrowed his eyes slightly and murmured to himself, can it really be such a coincidence? P.S. Well, I have to brace myself and tell you something. As the new year approaches, I'm really a little busy, so I have an idea. Last night, I told the readers in the group that during the new year, I will update once a day, which is a normal update. After the new year, I will update twice a day. Can the heroes and heroines accept this? Things are different now. Before I got married, my parents could understand my writing work. But now that I have a wife and a child, things are really different. So, that's why. This year, I really want to spend time with my family. Since I started my new book, I even have less time to sleep with my wife. I should spend time with my family before the new year and pay my New Year's greetings a few days later. I can probably update on the 5th. Chapter 146. Heavy rain poured over Dongdu. Ninghu, a few hundred kilometers away from Dongdu, had a sunny day. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Li Tianlan, who was dressed in sportswear and had become a young mute again, pulled an excessively large suitcase and walked slowly on the clean and tidy road of Ninghu. He looked like a young man traveling alone. He was ordinary and did not attract any attention along the way. The warm sunshine in the morning quietly sprinkled all over the city, making it warm and comfortable. Li Tianlan, who had abandoned the temporary car 20 kilometers away from Ninghu, walked aimlessly. When he passed by a hotel that did not look high-end, but was very clean and exquisite, he stopped, thought about it, and finally walked in a hall. After checking in, he dragged his luggage upstairs. Because he had a fake but extremely realistic fake identity and a lot of yen to clear the way, although he played the role of a mute, the whole process was extremely simple and smooth, without any accident. Li Tianlan's economic suite was on the 3rd floor, a height that would not embarrass him no matter what happened. The East Island-style suite space was ordinary, but it was extremely clean and elegant. The only drawback was that it was close to the block. Although the sound insulation was good, the outside world still seemed to be a little noisy. But Li Tianlan was very satisfied with the current environment. After a fierce battle, what he needed most now was to rest from Dongdu, where it was raining cats and dogs, to the sunny Ninghu. At 9 o'clock in the morning, if there was no accident, he could sleep until dinner time and even enjoy the world-famous Ninghu beef, and then continued to carry out hunting tasks in the dark and windy night. Throwing the suitcase aside, Li Tianlan sat on the tatami with a calm expression and took out a list again. On the list, 4 names: Sanluan Tungjing, Miyamoto, Shiny Eye, Takeda Akino, and Nakamura Akame had been drawn with a horizontal line. For Li Tianlan, it was a sign that the 4 people were dead. The remaining 26 people were his next hunting targets. Among the 4 lists that had been completed, Sanluan Tungjing and Miyamoto Shiny Eye could be said to be the targets that Li Tianlan deliberately went to hunt, while the remaining 2 were unexpected surprises. They were both killed by him when he rushed into the headquarters on Takeshita Street. Both of them were in the ordinary fire-flaming realm, but their positions were important. One was in charge of logistics, and the other was in charge of intelligence, so it didn't take much effort to kill them. With the death of these 4 people, the government of East Island's plan to take over all the forces of Night Spirit in East Island would undoubtedly be thwarted. Many people might not realize anything now, but as the hunting continued with the advancement of the 3 young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State, the whole East Island would realize what kind of people they were hunting. At that time, not to mention whether someone would actively fight for the positions left by Night Spirit. Even some people in the headquarters of Night Spirit who didn't want to be incorporated and lose their autonomy might have some other thoughts. Light a cigarette. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, put aside the matter of Dongdu, and began to study the list in front of him. In Ninghu, Li Tianlan was in charge of hunting for 3 people, and the most important one was Dubian Xiangyuan. Unlike the people of the Dark World and the personnel that the East Island government temporarily sent to take over Night Spirit after the destruction of Night Spirit, Dubian Xiangyuan had always been an important figure in Night Spirit, and he was also a very famous figure in East Island and even the world. Of course, Dubian Xiangyuan's fame was limited to some specific fields, such as genetics and biology. He was one of the most famous doctors in genetics and biology in the world. On the list, in Li Tianlan's hand, Dubian Xiangyuan's strength was ordinary. In terms of the difficulty of assassination, it was not more difficult than killing Miyamoto Shiny Eye. But the credits awarded by the Sky Academy were 200 more than Miyamoto Shiny Eye, which showed how valuable the head of this top doctor was. Li Tianlan silently stared at the name of Dubian Xiangyuan. After a long time, he unfolded the map of Ninghu that he took in the hotel and determined the location of this action. Sensoji in the western suburbs of Ninghu. This was the address given and the information given by Han Shixuan. It was very detailed, but also very vague. This ancient temple, with a long history in Ninghu, was the secret research institute presided over by Dubian Xiangyuan, but there was no mention of this research institute in the information. Sensoji was the only clue about Dubian Xiangyuan. A cigarette was about to burn out. Li Tianlan's fingers gently tapped on the map, without saying a word. Sensoji was about 50 kilometers away from the urban area of Ninghu. Judging from Li Tianlan's current location, there were at least a dozen roads leading to the destination. The traffic was very convenient, which also meant that Li Tianlan would not have too big a problem to retreat after he succeeded. But the biggest problem now was not how to retreat, but how to enter the Biological Research Institute under Sensoji that he did not even know the name of. Li Tianlan looked at his watch and hesitated. He did not know if he should go to Sensoji first. Sensoji in Ninghu was one of the tourist attractions. If he went there during the day, even if he could gain something, it would be extremely limited. He pinched out the cigarette, but gave up the idea of going to Sensoji. He lay on the tatami and closed his eyes to rest. When he was half asleep, the phone in the suite rang. Li Tianlan frowned, turned over, and continued to sleep. Time flew by in a trance. About an hour later, the sound of knocking on the door suddenly came from outside the door. The rhythm was very light, and it sounded a little cautious. Li Tianlan, who slept very lightly but deeply, opened his eyes immediately. The silver human emperor had slipped out of his cuff. Li Tianlan was expressionless. When he was about to ask who it was, he suddenly realized that he was now a mute. He narrowed his eyes slightly, stood up quietly, walked to the door, and opened it. An East Island girl, who looked about 27 or 28 years old, stood in front of the door and looked at Li Tianlan. She blushed and seemed to be a little nervous. This was a woman who could be regarded as extremely beautiful in most people's eyes. Her hair was dyed a very simple and elegant gray, and the outline of her face was soft and charming. She wore a tight waist shirt, which completely showed off her slender waist and plump chest. She wore a short skirt, seductive mesh stockings on her tender white thighs, and a pair of black stilettos on her feet. A faint fragrance floated into Li Tianlan's nostrils. The woman's small hand was holding a delicate and simple lady's bag, and she whispered, "Is this the service you ordered?" It was a very soft and coquettish Japanese, which sounded a little sweet and charming. Li Tianlan frowned slightly. He couldn't speak, so he just shook his head coldly and was about to close the door. "Please wait a minute." The woman's face seemed to be a little panicked. She stretched out an arm to stop Li Tianlan, bit her lip and whispered, "Sir, I'm very clean, and I'm a wife. My skills are very good, and I can definitely make you happy. If you're not satisfied with me, Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly, suddenly opened the door a little, and motioned for her to come in. The woman was stunned again, and subconsciously looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan pointed to his mouth, indicating that he couldn't speak, and stood in the door to make way for her. The woman hesitated a little, held the lady's bag in her hand, and stepped into the bedroom with a fragrant wind in her high heels. The woman entered the room, put the bag aside, turned around, bit her lip, looked at Li Tianlan, and said softly and obediently, "Shall we start now?" Her face was flushed, and she looked anxious and shy. "I can use my mouth first." I'd better take off my clothes first." Li Tianlan nodded with a calm expression. The woman seemed to be a little shy. She turned around and bowed her head to unbutton her shirt. Her long hair hung down, revealing a section of her tender white neck, which looked extremely attractive. Li Tianlan walked over and gently stroked her neck. The woman's body stiffened, and her face became redder. Her palms, which were unbuttoning, trembled slightly. "Nice appearance, but you have killing intent." Li Tianlan's voice suddenly sounded in the quiet room, where only the woman's rapid breathing was left, and he spoke in perfect Chinese. Before he finished his words, the face of the woman, who bowed her head to unbutton her shirt, had changed dramatically. As soon as Li Tianlan said "nice," she suddenly turned around. In an instant, Li Tianlan's palm pressed against her neck, but he caught nothing. The third button on the woman's shirt was unbuttoned. She reached out with both hands and had taken out 2 daggers glowing with a strange green light. "Turn around." Li Tianlan had just finished his words. Both of them were extremely fast. The moment the woman turned around, the human emperor in Li Tianlan's hand had slightly wrapped around her body. It was not a spear or a sword. The slender spearhead stuck out, the metal copper. The human emperor directly turned into a dagger. The human emperor thrust. Swish! Before the woman's figure with the 2 knives in her hand stabilized, the human emperor thrust had been fiercely stabbed into the woman's abdomen. Li Tianlan's expression was cold, and the human emperor turned slightly. Crack! In the crisp sound of metal, the human emperor thrust trembled slightly, and the blades on both sides of the spearhead stretched directly into the woman's body. Li Tianlan's hands were always stable, and his eyes were fierce and cold. In an instant, he directly pulled out the dagger. In an instant, there was a huge, strange-shaped hole in the woman's abdomen, and blood gushed out her mouth. She stared at Li Tianlan with a pair of eyes that were originally soft and affectionate, but now full of ferocity, and said, You have too many doubts." Li Tianlan said flatly, "I told you, you have killing intent." He raised his eyebrows slightly, looked at the woman in front of him, and asked, "Do you know the heavenly king heart?" The woman's eyes were full of understanding. She took a deep breath, let the blood gush out of her body, and pounced on him without hesitation. The fire in her room instantly bloomed, but it was not a blazing orange, but a very strange kind of pale green. Her body swelled up rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, she seemed to be several times bigger. In the expanding body, there was a muffled sound in her body, and the whole person exploded in an instant. The pale green flame was completely out of control in an instant, madly devouring everything in the room. Countless green juice burst out of the woman's body, completely enveloping Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's body shook. Countless green juice passed through his body. But Li Tianlan's real body had already appeared behind the woman. He pulled up the large suitcase in the room that contained the sky attack. Without hesitation, he strode a few steps, broke the window, and jumped directly from the third floor. In a messy sound of breaking, Li Tianlan dragged the suitcase to the ground with countless broken glass. Behind him, the green flame with strange light and shadow had spread and burned all over the third floor. Li Tianlan straightened up and began to run without looking back. He carried a huge suitcase, supported himself with one hand, stepped over the roadside railing, and rose into the air. A silver-white Lexus drove across the road in an instant. Li Tianlan stomped hard on the roof of the Lexus. Shadow, formula transposition. In the next second, Li Tianlan had already appeared on the other side of the road. He carried the suitcase and left the scene at full speed without stopping. Until his figure appeared on the other side of the street, around the hotel, some figures that seemed to stay nearby unintentionally suddenly came to their senses. Chase! In a subconscious silence, a cold and resolute voice suddenly sounded. At the main entrance of the hotel, a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes, who looked like a business elite, tore off his suit jacket. His figure flashed, and almost in the blink of an eye, he crossed the whole block and chased after Li Tianlan. In the full sprint, he took out a walkie-talkie and said quickly to the other end of the walkie-talkie, "Target confirmed. Blue sportswear, carrying a large suitcase, silver hair. All teams pay attention to interception and block this block." He paused and sped up again, saying, "Get the helicopter." Li Tianlan carried the large suitcase and walked like the wind, constantly changing positions with the shadow formula. In a few minutes, he was getting farther and farther away from the pursuers behind him. But he didn't relax at all. Instead, he became more and more serious. East Island. At this moment, he realized that he still underestimated the power of the East Island Special Warfare System. From Dongdu to Ninghu, a distance of hundreds of kilometers. In less than 12 hours, the East Island Special Warfare System had already locked his position. Needless to say, now that he was running away, Wang Xingxiao and Gu Hanshan must be in a bad situation. It was really not so easy to fight with the special warfare system of a country. To put it simply, after the initial hunting, they were exposed. The street was full of people. Li Tianlan quickly passed through a block. Vaguely, there seemed to be more and more figures blocking his way. They passed through from all directions, and in a very short time, they seemed to have surrounded Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's eyes were cold. He held the human emperor tightly in his hand and was about to fight his way out. In his ears, the roar of a car engine had sounded quickly. A black Mercedes-Benz rushed over in an almost reckless manner, knocking down 2 East Island residents on the side of the road, and finally stopped in front of Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Chapter 147. Get in the car. I can help you. Li Tianlan instinctively froze for a moment. The woman in the back row of the Mercedes-Benz looked about 26 or 27 years old. Her face was charming and soft, and her whole body was full of a mature and intellectual dignity. The streets of Ninghu were already in chaos. Countless elites of the special warfare system of East Island were rushing over from different directions, and some of them even took out weapons. But the woman in the car was always calm and looked at Li Tianlan with extremely sincere eyes. The woman's voice was soft and sweet, but the sweet Japanese fell into Li Tianlan's ears, and after being translated into Chinese, it became a mechanical and rigid tone. She was from East Island. This was the first thought that came to Li Tianlan's mind. In the chaotic street, inside and outside the car, the two people looked at each other. The next second, without any hesitation, Li Tianlan opened the door and sat in the car. The black Mercedes-Benz roared, and the sudden speed made Li Tianlan's body stick to the seat behind him. The whole car seemed to fly in an instant, and the ground of the car seemed to be lowering. The scenery on both sides of the window kept going backward and became blurred. Vaguely, Li Tianlan saw through the dashboard that the speed of the Mercedes-Benz had exceeded 150 miles per hour in just a few seconds. As a bumpkin who knew nothing about cars dozens of days ago, Li Tianlan couldn't imagine what kind of violent modification this car had gone through to have the performance that was even more exaggerated than most supercars. The Mercedes-Benz dashed left and right in the traffic on Ninghu Street. The performance of the car was good, and the driver was obviously a professional. Li Tianlan only felt that the car kept swaying on the street, and the huge car shuttled through the gaps in the traffic in a very dexterous manner. In just a few minutes, Li Tianlan had been farther and farther away from the place where he had just been besieged. The scene outside the window was still going backward quickly. Li Tianlan looked at the dashboard in front of him. The speed was 302. Damn it, this speed is almost like flying. The scene on the street gradually changed from noisy to quiet. Along the clean road, the Mercedes-Benz continued to move forward. The woman, who hadn't taken the initiative to speak since Li Tianlan got in the car, finally turned her head, looked at Li Tianlan, and said with a smile, "Thank you for your trust, Mr. Li. You made the best choice." Li Tianlan glanced at the woman and said nothing. Trust? This was complete nonsense. The reason why Li Tianlan dared to get in the car was that he could be sure that even if the worst happened, he could still escape. The car sped along the way, but neither the driver nor the woman beside him noticed that as the car continued to accelerate, there was always a patch of crystal clear and even water following the Mercedes-Benz. After entering the ice-condensing realm, Shueihua was Li Tianlan's shadow. As long as there was any danger, Shueihua would turn into his shadow and switch places with Li Tianlan. The whole process didn't even take a second. If he hadn't had great confidence in his own safety, he wouldn't have easily trusted the woman beside him whom he had never met, even if he had fought his way out. Let me introduce myself. My name is Shi Tianmingzi. Mr. Li can call me Mingzi. The woman smiled gently and reached out a small hand to Li Tianlan. I don't think I need to introduce myself. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows slightly and shook Shi Tianmingzi's hand. She called him Mr. Li as soon as she opened her mouth. It seemed meaningless whether he introduced himself or not. Of course, Shi Tianmingzi's eyes were coquettish, and there was a kind of obvious fanaticism and worship in them. It was a kind of charming look that people knew was fake, but it could make people believe it. The third young heavenly son of Zhongzhou State, Li Tianlan of Sai City. Almost everyone in East Island who should know about your current identity already knows about it. Of course, that includes our Shitian clan. Li Tianlan's heart suddenly sank, but he didn't show any panicked expression. At times like this, he had to be calm. He calmly glanced at Shi Tianmingzi and said with a smile, "You moved fast enough. It's not difficult," Shi Tianmingzi said indifferently. "After all, this is East Island. I can only say that we didn't expect Zhongzhou State to have such a big plan. If I'm not mistaken, you three young heavenly sons are only part of it. Zhongzhou State, there should be a large part of the elites that have secretly sneaked into East Island, right? So, the chaos in Zhongzhou State that the Dark World cares about, and the challenge of the Lord of Samsara City to the God of War of Zhongzhou State, is just a hoax, right?" Li Tianlan was expressionless and said nothing. He didn't know much about this kind of thing. Even if he knew all about it, he had no comment. "Mr. Li," Shi Tianmingzi frowned. Her frown was very subtle, which made her look more delicate and charming. "This problem is very important to Shitian clan, so please tell us the truth." She sat in the car, bowed deeply, and said softly and respectfully, "Please. In return, I will tell you a very important news. Believe me, this news is very important to you." Shitian clan? Li Tianlan heard the surname again and felt it was more and more familiar. He frowned thoughtfully. "My father is Shi Tianmingzi," Shi Tianmingzi said softly. Shi Tianmingzi. Li Tianlan's heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly became enlightened. He had indeed heard of this clan and this name. Before the hunting operation began, Han Shishuan emphasized on introducing this name. The name Shitian Clan, in Han Shishuan's mouth, was Shitian Financial Group. It was one of the youngest consortiums in East Island and the largest ATM of Night Spirit in East Island. With the destruction of Night Spirit, the logistics department of the Divine Wind Force and the Ministry of Finance of East Island had sent officials to Shitian Financial Group and were negotiating with Shitian Ingji. This was all the information Li Tianlan got. Li Tianlan's eyes flickered. If the identity of Shitian Mingzi was true, then there was no doubt that East Island, the youngest world-class consortium, had been a little restless after the destruction of Night Spirit. At least, they were not willing to accept the status quo that the consortium was controlled by the Divine Wind Force and the Ministry of Finance. That was why Shitian Mingzi contacted him. Is the situation in Zhongzhou State so important to Shitian Clan? Li Tianlan smiled. So what if that battle is true? So what if it's false? Shitian Mingzi gently bit her pink and tender lips. In the case of asking for help, she had no initiative at all. She could only lower her eyes and say, after this battle, if the master of Samsara Palace is safe and sound, Shitian Financial Group is willing to provide economic support for Samsara. Li Tianlan suddenly turned his head and looked at Shitian Mingzi with burning eyes. Shitian Mingzi also looked at him with a firm look. Shitian Financial Group provided economic support for Samsara. What did this mean? Treason? Li Tianlan looked at the woman beside him for a full minute, then slightly raised his eyebrows and said, in fact, long before the destruction of Night Spirit, my father had begun to apply for Swiss citizenship. We just left Night Spirit, not treason. For many years, Night Spirit has been trying to get out of the control of the East Island government. His Highness Tianxin moving the headquarters to Billy State is a good example. Night Spirit and East Island seem to be in harmony, but the fight in the dark is extremely cruel. Shitian Mingzi whispered. Li Tianlan's eyes had narrowed tightly. Vaguely, he seemed to have grasped some of the core veins of Zhongzhou State's plot. But the idea flashed in his mind, and then it became untraceable. Go on. His body leaned against the seat, and he said calmly, after the destruction of Night Spirit, from the perspective of the cabinet, the first thing they want to get is Shitian Financial Group. At present, the negotiation between the government and the family is still going on. If there is no accident, the government will buy nearly 50% of the shares of Shitian Financial Group at a very low price and become the first shareholder of the consortium. Everything of Shitian Clan will shrink countless times. My father has been serving Night Spirit in recent years, and in the secret game between Night Spirit and East Island for many years, my father has offended a lot of people. Once the control of Shitian Financial Group falls into the hands of the government will definitely be happy for other forces to hit Shitian Financial Group when it is down. At that time, what awaits us will be a disaster. Shitian Mingzi whispered, so we are willing to choose Samsara. Samsara Palace is a force that has just risen in the dark world in recent years. But the Palace Master is a real super expert and the boss most worthy of our service. If the battle between Her Highness and the God of War of Zhongzhou State is false, then it is true that Samsara and Zhongzhou State conspired against East Island. In other words, Samsara is also one of the super forces in the dark world that least needs to care about East Island. Such a force is most likely to be willing to accept Shitian Financial Group. Li Tianlan was silent. After a long time, he looked out of the window and said calmly, you made the right choice. He couldn't fully trust Shitian Mingzi now, but it didn't matter to give her some signals that were irrelevant to the overall situation. Shitian Mingzi's eyes lit up slightly, and she keenly grasped the information contained in Li Tianlan's words. She bowed deeply again and said seriously, thank you, Mr. Li. She paused and said again, we know that you have a very close relationship with Boss Qin of Samsara. If you can, I hope you can help Shitian Financial Group to reach a cooperation with Samsara. Please. Li Tianlan didn't say anything, but chuckled and said, Miss Mingzi, I remember you just said that you would tell me a very important news from me. Yes. Shi Tianmingzi's face tightened subconsciously. She took a deep breath and lowered her voice, saying, Tianlan, you must be careful in the next action. At present, the Divine Wind Force has all gone down the Holy Mountain and is tracking down all the infiltrators from Zhongzhou State to East Island. You, Wang Shengxiao, and Gu Hanzhan are the top priority of the Divine Wind Force. Your assassination target is too obvious. Combining some of the dead people, some people have concluded that Zhongzhou State wants to attack everything left by Night Spirit in East Island. Unfortunately, the Divine Wind Force has already made targeted arrangements for these situations. She took a deep breath, and her plump chest swelled slightly. The invincible realm expert in East Island, Supreme Ninja Shinichi Miyamoto, even suggested the Mikado and the Prime Minister to directly wake up the Kusanagi force, but they refused. But I have a really reliable news that His Highness Shinichi Miyamoto is likely to personally carry out the obliteration plan this time. The 3 young heavenly sons of Zhongzhou State are all on his obliteration list, and you, if the intelligence is correct, you should be the first on His Highness Miyamoto's obliteration list. An invincible realm expert personally carried out the obliteration operation? Li Tianlan subconsciously tightened his body, and his expression was solemn. Tianlan, if I'm not mistaken, you came to Ninghu to attack Sensodera, right? Shi Tianmingzi sighed softly and continued. I don't know if your country's intelligence infiltration is not thorough or if there are other reasons. I just want to say that if you act alone in Sensodera, you will almost certainly die. You should have a list in your hand, right? If the person who gave you this list knew a little about Sensodera, he would not have let you carry out this action. She paused and said calmly, the other party obviously doesn't intend to let you go back alive. Li Tianlan smiled, but subconsciously clenched his hands. The one who gave him this hunting list, it was Yi Fengsheng, the general of the Southeast Group. Is there anything special about Sensodera? Li Tianlan asked. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.